The Georgia sun hammered down on Fort Benning's shooting range like the wrath of an unforgiving god. Heat shimmers danced across the red clay, distorting the target silhouettes that stood at measured intervals stretching toward the tree line. 1,000 yards downrange, a steel plate caught the light and winked like a knowing eye. Master Sergeant Jack Hawkins had been staring at that plate for the better part of 3 decades, and it had never once lied to him. Until today. He blinked hard, once, then twice. The world swam back into focus, the steel plate resolving from a gray smear into its proper rectangular shape. 2 seconds. That was all it took for his vision to betray him. 2 seconds that could mean the difference between a clean kill and a catastrophic miss. Between mission success and body bags lined up on a tarmac somewhere far from home. Jack was 54 years old and his eyes were dying. Behind him, a semicircle of 12 students watched with the kind of reverent attention usually reserved for prophets and presidents. They ranged in age from 22 to 38, a collection of Rangers, Special Forces candidates, and one Marine liaison who had the misfortune of being assigned to an Army sniper course. They wore the same multicam uniforms, the same Oakley sunglasses, the same expression of focused determination. What they didn't wear yet was the quiet confidence that came from knowing you could reach out across impossible distances and change the course of a firefight with a single well-placed round. That was Jack's job, to give them that confidence, to transform shooters into snipers. He settled into position behind his rifle, a worn M24 that had seen service in 3 different theaters and bore the scars to prove it. The stock was smooth from thousands of hours against his cheek. The trigger broke at exactly 3.5 pounds, same as it had for the past 8 years. Everything about the weapon was familiar, predictable, trustworthy. Everything except the man behind it. Jack controlled his breathing, falling into the rhythm that had become as natural as his heartbeat. In through the nose, slow and steady, out through the mouth, even slower. His heart rate dropped. The world narrowed. There was no heat, no watching students, no career hanging in the balance. There was only the rifle, the target, and the space between them. Wind, left to right, maybe 4 miles per hour. Temperature 107 degrees. Humidity pushing 60%. The mirage boiled and shimmered, but Jack had learned to read those dancing waves of heat like other men read newspapers. The air was thick, heavy with moisture that would slow his bullet by a fraction. He adjusted his hold, raising the crosshairs just a hair. 1,000 yards. The distance where amateurs became believers and believers became legends. He pressed the trigger. The rifle barked, the recoil a familiar punch against his shoulder. Through the scope, he watched the vapor trail of his bullet cut through the summer air. 4 seconds. That was how long it took for a 175-grain Sierra Match King to travel 1,000 yards at 2,650 feet per second. 4 seconds during which Jack held perfectly still, watching, waiting for the inevitable impact. The steel plate rang like a church bell, center mass. Behind him, someone let out a low whistle. Jack cycled the bolt, chambering another round, and fired again without breaking position. Another hit, this one 2 inches left of the first. He fired 3 more times in rapid succession, each shot finding steel, each impact grouped tight enough that a man's fist would cover all 5 holes. Jack stood slowly, knees protesting the movement, and turned to face his students. They looked at him like he had just performed a magic trick, which in a way, he supposed he had. Most of them couldn't hit a man-sized target at 500 yards with any consistency. Jack had just put 5 rounds into a 12-inch plate at twice that distance while making it look as easy as breathing. What they didn't know, what he would never tell them, was that the first shot had been a guess. For those 2 seconds when his vision had blurred, he had been firing blind, trusting muscle memory and 30 years of experience to guide his hands. He had gotten lucky. Jack Hawkins knew better than most that luck was a currency you couldn't count on. Sooner or later, the bank came calling. Questions? His voice carried across the range, rough as gravel and twice as unforgiving. A hand went up. Specialist Martinez, 23 years old and fresh from Ranger School. Kid had good fundamentals but lacked patience. He wanted to learn everything in a week that had taken Jack a lifetime to master. Sergeant Hawkins, how do you account for the heat mirage? I can barely see the target through all that shimmer. Jack picked up his rifle, cradling it in the crook of his arm. You don't fight the mirage, Martinez. You read it. Hot air rises, creates waves. Those waves tell you wind speed, temperature gradient, air density. Most shooters look through the mirage. Good snipers look at it. He gestured toward the downrange targets. Your eye wants to focus on the target. That's natural. But the information you need is in the air between you and that target. Learn to see what's invisible, and you'll make shots other men think are impossible. It sounded good. Hell, it was true. Jack had given some version of this speech 100 times over the years. But standing there in the merciless heat, feeling his vision swim at the edges, he wondered how much longer he could practice what he preached. Another hand went up. Sergeant Diaz, 31, 3 deployments to Afghanistan under his belt. Solid shooter, tactical mind sharp as a razor. Sergeant, what about ballistic computers? Some of the guys are saying we should be using tech to calculate drops and wind calls, get faster solutions. Jack felt something cold settle in his chest. Here it was, the conversation he had been avoiding for months. Technology fails, he said, his voice flat. Batteries die, circuits fry in the heat or freeze in the cold, sand gets into moving parts. A ballistic computer is a tool, and tools break. He paused, letting that sink in. Your instinct, your experience, your ability to read the environment, that's what saves lives when everything else goes to hell. I've made 89 confirmed kills across 6 deployments. Every single one of those shots was calculated up here. He tapped his temple. Not on a screen. The student nodded, scribbling notes, absorbing wisdom from a man who had been practicing the sniper's craft since before most of them were born. Jack felt like a fraud, not because what he was teaching was wrong, but because he was no longer certain he could follow his own advice. How could you trust your instinct when your eyes were betraying you? The rest of the morning session passed in a blur of instruction and demonstration. Jack walked his students through wind reading, range estimation, target identification. He showed them how to build a hide, how to control their breathing, how to wait with the patience of stone for the perfect shot. All the while, his vision would occasionally blur at the edges, forcing him to blink hard and refocus. No one seemed to notice, or if they did, they were too polite or too intimidated to say anything. By noon, the temperature had climbed past 110 degrees. Jack dismissed the class, watching them trudge toward the air-conditioned comfort of the classroom building where they would spend the afternoon studying ballistics tables and memorizing range cards. The Marine, Lieutenant something or other, hung back. Sergeant Hawkins, can I ask you something? Jack shouldered his rifle case, already regretting whatever conversation was about to happen. Make it quick, Lieutenant. I've got an appointment. Yes, Sergeant. The kid looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot. I wanted to ask about Captain Reeves. I heard she's going to be running operations for the team deploying to Afghanistan next month. Alicia Reeves. Jack kept his expression neutral. What about her? Well, sir, I've heard she's really into the technology side of things. Ballistic computers, laser rangefinders, all the new gear. Some of the guys are saying she thinks the old ways are outdated. The lieutenant's voice dropped lower, conspiratorial. Is that true? Jack studied the young Marine, barely 25, probably never fired a shot in anger, looking for confirmation that his traditional training still mattered in an age of drones and smart weapons. Captain Reeves is an excellent shot, Jack said carefully. 34 confirmed kills, 12 years of service, 3 combat deployments. She knows her business. But does she respect yours? The question hung in the scorching air between them. Jack thought about the last conversation he had with Alicia 2 weeks ago in Colonel Garrett's office. She had stood there with her tablet computer, showing thermal imaging data and satellite reconnaissance photos, talking about the future of asymmetric warfare. And Jack had sat there, feeling older than dirt, wondering when exactly the world had passed him by. The captain and I have different philosophies, Jack said finally, but we both want the same thing, to bring our people home alive. It wasn't quite an answer, but it was all the lieutenant was going to get. The kids saluted and walked away, leaving Jack alone on the range with nothing but heat and doubt for company. The appointment Jack had mentioned was at the VA hospital 30 minutes outside Fort Benning. He drove there with his windows down, letting the hot Georgia wind blast through his truck cab, as if the noise and heat could drown out the voice in his head, telling him what he already knew. Dr. Rajesh Patel was a thin man with kind eyes in the unfortunate job of delivering bad news to soldiers who had spent their lives believing they were indestructible. He pulled up Jack's chart on his computer screen and gestured to the chair across from his desk. Sergeant Hawkins, thank you for coming in. I have your test results. Jack sat. His hands rested on his knees, steady and calm. It was a trick he had learned in Fallujah back in 2004, when staying calm under pressure was the difference between living and dying. Your body could lie, your breathing could stay controlled, your heartbeat slow and regular. But inside, where no one could see, you could be screaming. "Give it to me straight, Doc." Dr. Patel pulled up an image on his screen. It looked like a photograph of the sun, all orange and red with a dark spot in the center. Jack's eye magnified and exposed, showing all its secrets. The macular degeneration is progressing faster than we hoped. The drusen deposits are increasing, and we're seeing early signs of geographic atrophy. The doctor's voice was gentle, like he was explaining something to a child. In layman's terms, the cells in the center of your retina are dying. Your peripheral vision will remain intact, but your central vision, the part you use for reading, driving, and, he glanced at Jack's file, precision shooting, will continue to deteriorate. "How long?" Jack's voice came out rougher than he intended. "It's hard to say with certainty, but based on the rate of progression, I would estimate you have 6 months, maybe less, before the vision loss becomes significant enough to impact your daily activities. Within a year, you will likely be legally blind in your dominant eye. 6 months. Less than the time it took to deploy, serve, and return home. Less than a single rotation in the endless war Jack had been fighting since he was 26 years old. All those years, all those missions, all those perfect shots across impossible distances, and now his eyes were going to quit on him before the rest of his body got the memo. "Can it be stopped?" Jack asked, though he already knew the answer. He had done his research, spent late nights scrolling through medical journals and treatment studies. There are therapies that can slow the progression. Vitamin supplements, lifestyle modifications, periodic injections. But no, Sergeant Hawkins, it cannot be stopped, and it cannot be reversed. Jack sat there, absorbing the information like he would absorb incoming fire. You took cover, you assessed the situation. You made a plan. Getting emotional didn't change the facts. "I need you to understand the implications," Dr. Patel continued. "Your medical board review is in 2 weeks. When they see these results, they will recommend immediate removal from active duty status. At your age and with this condition, there is no scenario in which they will allow you to remain in a combat MOS, military occupational specialty, the bureaucratic term for the job that had defined Jack's entire adult life. He was a sniper, had been since 1996 when he graduated from the Army Sniper School at the top of his class. Before that, he had been infantry, a regular grunt with a rifle and too much confidence. But from the moment he looked through a scope and felt the world narrow to the space between the crosshairs, he had known he had found his calling. Now they were going to take it away. "What if I don't report it?" Jack heard himself say. Dr. Patel's expression hardened. "Sergeant, I am legally obligated to report these findings to the medical board. And even if I wasn't, you would be putting lives at risk. Your teammates, the soldiers who depend on your accuracy. You're experiencing vision loss in high-stress situations, are you not?" Jack didn't answer. He didn't have to. The doctor had already seen the truth written on his face. "You have given 28 years to this country," Dr. Patel said, his voice softer now. "You have earned the right to retire with honor and dignity. Don't throw that away because you're afraid to let go." But that was exactly what Jack was afraid of. Because what was he without the rifle, without the mission? His wife Sarah had died of cancer 10 years ago. His son Ryan was a Marine pilot stationed in Okinawa, close to his father in spirit, but separated by 7,000 miles of ocean. Jack had no hobbies, no interests outside of shooting. He didn't golf or fish or restore old cars. He woke up every morning, went to the range, and taught young men and women how to kill at distance. That was his life. That was his purpose. And now some degenerative eye disease was going to take it all away. Jack stood, shook the doctor's hand, and walked out of the office without another word. He made it to his truck before the rage hit him. Not the hot, explosive kind of anger that made men do stupid things. This was cold fury, the kind that settled deep in your bones and turned everything brittle. He gripped the steering wheel hard enough to make his knuckles white and sat there in the parking lot, staring at nothing, feeling the weight of inevitability pressing down on him like a physical thing. His phone buzzed, a text message from Colonel James Garrett. "Need to see you, my office, 1600 hours. Jack checked his watch. He had 2 hours, enough time to drive back to base, clean up, and prepare himself for whatever conversation was waiting. Garrett had been his commanding officer for 3 years, but before that they had served together in Iraq, Fallujah, Ramadi, Mosul, places where the line between living and dying was measured in inches and split seconds. Garrett was one of the few men on Earth who Jack trusted completely, which made what Jack was about to do even worse. The drive back to Fort Benning gave him time to think, time to make a decision that he knew was wrong but couldn't seem to avoid. By the time he pulled into the base and showed his ID at the gate, his mind was made up. He was going to lie. He was going to hide his condition from the medical board, from his command, from everyone who might have the authority to ground him. And he was going to volunteer for one last deployment. 30 years. That was the threshold for full retirement benefits. Jack had 28 years and 2 months of service. One more deployment, 4 months in Afghanistan, and he would hit that magic number. He would retire on his own terms, with full benefits and his dignity intact. All he had to do was keep his failing eyesight a secret for a little while longer. He parked his truck and walked across the parade ground toward the command building. The late afternoon sun painted everything in shades of gold and amber. Soldiers ran in formation, their cadence calls echoing across the open space. Somewhere in the distance, a drill sergeant was tearing into a platoon of new recruits with creative profanity that would have made a sailor blush. It was all so familiar, so comfortable, that the thought of leaving it made Jack's chest tighten. Colonel Garrett's office was on the second floor, overlooking the parade ground. His aide, a young specialist whose name Jack could never remember, waved him through without ceremony. Jack knocked twice on the doorframe and entered. Garrett looked up from a stack of paperwork and smiled. He was 58, gray creeping into his hair at the temples. But his eyes were sharp and his handshake was still firm when he stood to greet Jack. "Jack, good to see you. Sit." Jack sat in the chair across from Garrett's desk, the same chair he had occupied countless times over the years. On the wall behind the colonel hung the usual collection of commendations, unit photos, and a faded American flag that had flown over their forward operating base in Ramadi. They had been lieutenants together back then, young and stupid and convinced of their own immortality. "How did the morning session go?" Garrett asked, settling back into his chair. "Good. Martinez is still too eager, but he's learning. Diaz has real potential. The Marine is competent." "High praise from you." Garrett's smile was genuine. "I got your evaluation reports. Looks like another successful class." "They'll do fine." Jack shifted in his seat, trying to read Garrett's expression. The colonel had something on his mind. "You didn't ask a senior NCO to your office, just to discuss training metrics." Garrett seemed to sense Jack's impatience. He pulled a folder from his desk drawer and slid it across to Jack. "I'm putting together a team for Kunar province, 4-month rotation, advisory mission. We'll be training Afghan National Army snipers, providing overwatch for their operations, basically doing what we do here, but in a much less friendly environment." Jack opened the folder. Inside were mission briefs, intelligence assessments, and personnel rosters. His eyes went straight to the command structure. Team leader, Captain Alicia Reeves. Senior advisor, Master Sergeant Jack Hawkins. He looked up at Garrett. "You want me as an advisor? I want your experience in the field. Alicia is brilliant, Jack, sharp as they come, tactically sound, and the soldiers respect her. But she's 32 years old. She needs someone who's been there, who knows how to read a situation before it goes sideways." Garrett leaned forward. "I need you watching her back." Jack studied the roster. 4 snipers, 2 spotters, a radio man, and support personnel. All solid soldiers, all combat tested. It was a good team. A chance to do real work instead of standing on a range in Georgia teaching the same lessons year after year. It was exactly what he needed. "When do we deploy?" Jack asked. 3 weeks. "I know it's short notice, but the situation on the ground is deteriorating. Taliban activity is up 300% in the last quarter. They're getting bold, Jack. We've lost 8 soldiers to sniper fire in the past 2 months. 8 soldiers. 8 families getting visits from casualty notification officers. 8 flag-draped coffins coming home to Dover Air Force Base." Jack thought about Dr. Patel's warning, about the lives that would be at risk if his eyesight failed at a critical moment. Then he thought about sitting behind a desk for the next 30 years, growing old and useless, watching other men do the job he was born for. "I'm in," Jack said. Garrett's expression softened with something that might have been relief. "I had a feeling you'd say that. Sarah would have kicked my ass for asking, you know. She always said I was a bad influence on you." The mention of Jack's wife brought a familiar ache. Sarah had been gone for a decade, but Garrett still spoke about her in present tense sometimes, like she was just in the other room waiting to offer her opinion on their latest terrible idea. She would have understood, Jack said quietly. She always did. Yeah. Garrett was quiet for a moment, then seemed to shake off the melancholy. There's one more thing. Alicia specifically requested you for this mission. She said, and I quote, "I want the best working with me, and Hawkins is the best." Jack felt something twist in his chest. Respect from a fellow professional should have made him proud. Instead, it made him feel like a liar. Because the best version of Jack Hawkins existed in the past, before his eyes started failing, before age and deterioration started catching up with decades of wear and tear. "When do I meet with the team?" Jack asked. "Tomorrow morning, 0800. I'll have Alicia brief everyone on the mission parameters." Garrett stood, extending his hand. "Welcome back to the fight, Jack." Jack shook his hand and left the office, the folder tucked under his arm. He walked through the command building on autopilot, his mind already running through equipment lists and training schedules. 3 weeks wasn't much time to prepare, but it was enough. He would run his gear checks, zero his rifle, make sure everything was dialed in and ready. And he would pray that his eyes held out just a little longer. The barracks were quiet when Jack got back to his quarters. Most of the instructors were still out on the ranges or in classrooms. He had a room to himself, a small privilege afforded to senior NCOs. The space was sparse, a narrow bed, a footlocker, a desk with his laptop and a lamp. On the wall above his bed hung a single photograph in a simple frame. Sarah. She was laughing at the photo, her head thrown back, her eyes crinkled at the corners. Jack couldn't remember what had been so funny that day, but he remembered the way her laughter had sounded, like music, like home. He sat on the edge of his bed and opened the folder Garrett had given him. The mission brief was straightforward enough. Embed with Afghan forces, train their snipers, provide counter-sniper support for coalition operations. Standard advisory work, the kind of mission Jack had run a dozen times in Iraq and Afghanistan. But embedded in the intelligence annex was a detail that made him pause. Enemy sniper activity, Kunar province. Significant increase in long-range engagements, 800 to 2,100 yards. Pattern suggests single highly trained individual, possibly foreign fighter. Psychological warfare component, white feathers left at kill sites. USKIA, 8, wounded 14. White feathers. Jack stared at those two words, feeling something cold crawl up his spine. In some cultures, a white feather was a symbol of cowardice. In others, it was a calling card, a signature left by someone who wanted you to know exactly who had killed you. He thought about the sniper out there somewhere in the mountains of Afghanistan, leaving his mark on American bodies. Thought about the skill required to make consistent kills at those distances. Thought about the kind of training it took to develop that level of precision. And he thought about a young Afghan interpreter he had known 15 years ago in Helmand province. A man with a natural gift for shooting, who had learned everything Jack could teach him. A man whose family had died in an airstrike that Jack had called in based on faulty intelligence. Rashid Ahmadi. Jack closed the folder and set it aside. He was getting paranoid in his old age, seeing ghosts in mission briefs. Rashid had disappeared in 2009, probably dead in any one of 1,000 ways that men died in war zones. The chances that he had survived, joined the Taliban, and become their premier sniper were astronomically small, but not impossible. Jack pulled out his phone and scrolled to his son's contact. Ryan was 7 hours ahead in Okinawa. It would be early morning there, and his son was probably already in the air, flying some training mission over the Pacific. Jack typed out a message. "Deploying to Afghanistan in 3 weeks. 4-month rotation. Don't worry. Love you." He hit send before he could second-guess himself. Ryan would worry anyway. That was what sons did when their fathers went to war. But at least he would know. At least someone would know where Jack was going and why. The rest of the evening passed in routine preparation. Jack cleaned his rifle, a ritual that was more meditation than maintenance. He inventoried his gear, making lists of items to requisition. He reviewed his training notes, looking for gaps in his own knowledge that might get someone killed. And every so often, his vision would blur at the edges, and he would blink hard and force himself to focus. By the time he fell asleep, the Georgia night was thick with humidity and the sound of crickets. Jack dreamed of mountains and dust, of crosshairs and targets that moved like ghosts through his failing sight. He dreamed of Sarah, standing in a doorway somewhere beyond his reach, shaking her head like she knew exactly what he was doing and disapproved. When he woke just after dawn, his phone showed 3 missed calls from Ryan and a single text message. "Dad, we need to talk about this." Jack set the phone aside without responding. There would be time for that conversation later. Right now, he had a mission to prepare for, a team to meet, and approximately 6 months of usable eyesight left to prove that he still had something to offer. The morning air was already warm when Jack walked to the briefing room at 800. Inside, 6 soldiers sat around a conference table waiting. Alicia Reeves stood at the front of the room, a tablet computer in her hands, looking every inch the professional operator. She glanced up when Jack entered and nodded. "Sergeant Hawkins, good morning. We were just getting started." Jack took a seat at the table, studying the faces around him. Sergeant Marcus Kane, 38 years old, 4 deployments, a reputation for precision shooting that rivaled Jack's own. Kane met his eyes and nodded slowly. No warmth there, just professional acknowledgement. Corporal Danny Vega, 23, on his 2nd deployment, eager as a puppy and twice as energetic. The kid practically vibrated with excitement. He had volunteered to be Jack's spotter, a role that required trust and chemistry that usually took months to develop. Staff Sergeant Lee, 29, quiet and competent. Specialist Torres, 21, their radio man, looking nervous. Alicia activated the screen behind her, displaying a topographical map of eastern Afghanistan. Kunar Province, a maze of valleys and mountains along the Pakistan border. Some of the most hostile terrain in the world, where coalition forces had been fighting and dying for nearly 2 decades. "Gentlemen," Alicia began, her voice calm and authoritative, "our mission is to embed with Afghan National Army forces and provide sniper training and support. Intel suggests increased Taliban activity, including a highly skilled enemy sniper who has been responsible for multiple coalition casualties." She pulled up photographs of kill sites. American soldiers, their bodies covered, but the damage obvious. And in each photo, a white feather placed carefully on or near the body. "Our objective is to neutralize this threat while training ANA snipers to continue the mission after we rotate home. Duration is 4 months. Questions?" Kane raised his hand. "Ma'am, what about equipment? Are we going high-tech or traditional?" Alicia's expression was neutral, but Jack caught the slight tension in her jaw. "We'll have access to the latest ballistic computers, laser rangefinders, and thermal optics. These tools will give us a significant advantage in target acquisition and engagement." Kane nodded, satisfied. Jack said nothing. He could feel the unspoken division in the room. Half the soldiers were nodding along with Alicia, ready to embrace technology. The other half were glancing at Jack, waiting to see if the old master had an opinion. "Sergeant Hawkins," Alicia said, turning to face him directly, "I know you prefer traditional methods. I respect that, but I need you to understand that on this mission, I'm tactical lead. My decisions are final." It wasn't a challenge, it was a statement of fact. Alicia was in charge, and Jack was there to advise, not command. The role reversal stung more than he cared to admit. He had been running missions when Alicia was still in high school, but rank was rank, and the chain of command was sacred. "Understood, Captain," Jack said evenly. "You're the boss." Something flickered in Alicia's eyes. Relief maybe, or respect. "Good, then let's get to work. We have 3 weeks to prepare, and I intend to use every minute of it." The briefing continued for another hour, covering logistics, rules of engagement, medical protocols, and contingency plans. When it finally ended, the soldiers filed out, already forming into the small groups and partnerships that would define the next 4 months of their lives. Alicia stopped Jack as he headed for the door. "Sergeant, can we talk? Privately?" Jack nodded and followed her into a small office adjacent to the briefing room. Alicia closed the door and leaned against the desk, her arms crossed. "I know this is awkward," she said without preamble. "You've been doing this job since I was a kid. You have more experience, more confirmed kills, more respect from the community than I'll probably ever earn. And now I'm giving you orders. That's how the Army works, Captain. I've got no problem with it." "Don't you?" Alicia's eyes were sharp. "Because I've heard the talk, Jack, about how the old ways are better than the new ways, about how technology makes us soft, lazy, dependent. And I know that's coming from you." Jack kept his expression neutral. "I teach what I know, what's kept me alive for 28 years. And I respect that. But the world has changed. The enemy has changed. We have tools now that can save lives, that can give us advantages our fathers never dreamed of." She paused. "I need you on this mission, Jack. I need your experience, your instinct, your ability to read situations. But I also need you to trust me. Can you do that? It was a fair question. Jack thought about his answer carefully. I trust you to lead, Captain, and I'll follow your orders. But if I see something going wrong, if my experience tells me we're heading for trouble, I'm going to speak up. That's my job as senior advisor. Alicia considered this, then nodded. Fair enough. Just promise me one thing. Don't go rogue on me. If you have concerns, bring them to me first. We're a team. You have my word. They shook hands, and Jack left the office feeling oddly lighter. Maybe this deployment wouldn't be a disaster. Maybe he and Alicia could find a way to work together, bridging the gap between old school and new school, experience and innovation. Or maybe his eyes would fail him at exactly the wrong moment, and people would die because he was too proud and too stubborn to admit he was past his prime. 3 weeks passed in the blur of preparation and training. Jack ran his team through every drill he could think of, pushing them hard, looking for weaknesses. Kane proved to be as good as advertised, consistently making shots that would have impressed even the most seasoned snipers. Vega was raw but eager, soaking up knowledge like a sponge. Lee and Torres rounded out the team competently. And through it all, Jack felt time running out like sand through his fingers. His vision continued to deteriorate, small incidents that he managed to hide through experience and careful positioning. A missed range call here, a moment of hesitation there. Nothing catastrophic yet, but the trend was clear. 2 days before deployment, Jack made the drive to Arlington National Cemetery. It was a 5-hour trip from Fort Benning, but he made it every year on the anniversary of Sarah's death. This year, he was early by 3 weeks, but he needed to see her one more time before he left. The cemetery was quiet, row upon row of white headstones stretching across manicured grass. Sarah's grave was in Section 60, where they buried the recent war dead. She hadn't been military, but as the spouse of a career soldier, she had earned her place among the honored. Jack stood in front of her headstone, reading the words he had memorized a decade ago. Sarah Elizabeth Hawkins, beloved wife and mother, 1970 to 2015. He set a small bouquet of wildflowers against the stone. Sarah had hated roses, said they were too formal, too stiff. She had preferred the simple beauty of flowers that grew wild and free. Hey, Sarah, Jack said quietly. I know I'm early this year, got a deployment coming up. Afghanistan, 4 months. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the scent of cut grass and summer flowers. I know what you'd say. You'd tell me I'm too old for this, that I've done enough, that I should retire, maybe get a teaching job somewhere, live a normal life. He smiled sadly. You'd be right too, you usually were. A groundskeeper passed in the distance, pushing a wheelbarrow. Jack waited until the man was out of earshot before continuing. My eyes are going, Sarah. Macular degeneration. Doc says I've got 6 months before I'm legally blind. The smart thing would be to report it, let them ground me, take my retirement. He paused. But I'm not going to do that. I'm going to Afghanistan, and I'm going to do my job, and then I'm going to come home and retire on my own terms. He could almost hear her voice in his head, exasperated and loving all at once. Jack Hawkins, you stubborn old fool. I made you a promise, what you said, Albine, that I'd know when to let go, and I will, after this mission. One more, then I'm done. But I need to go out on my feet, Sarah, not pushed out by a medical board. Can you understand that? The cemetery was silent. Jack stood there for a long time, watching the shadows grow longer as the afternoon sun arced toward evening. Finally, he reached out and touched the cool marble of the headstone. I love you. I'll see you when I'm done. He walked back to his truck, climbed behind the wheel, and started the long drive back to Fort Benning. By the time he arrived, it was well past midnight. He had less than 48 hours before wheels up. The night before deployment, Jack's phone rang. Ryan's name appeared on the screen. Jack hesitated, then answered. Hey, son. Dad, Ryan's voice was tight. I've been calling you for 3 weeks. I know, I'm sorry. Been busy with prep. Too busy to talk to your son about deploying to a war zone at 54 years old? Jack rubbed his eyes, feeling every one of those 54 years settle on his shoulders. Ryan, I know you're worried, but I've done this 100 times. I'll be fine. Will you? There was an edge to Ryan's voice that Jack had never heard before. Because I talked to Colonel Garrett's aide. He told me you're going as an advisor, not a team leader. That means you're not calling the shots anymore, Dad. You're taking orders from someone half your age. Captain Reeves is an excellent officer. I'm not questioning her. I'm questioning you. Ryan took a breath, and when he spoke again, his voice was calmer. Dad, Mom made me promise something before she died. She made me promise that if you ever started taking unnecessary risks, if you ever started acting like you had nothing left to lose, I would call you out on it. Jack felt his throat tighten. This isn't unnecessary, Ryan. It's my job. Your job is to train snipers at Fort Benning. This deployment is optional. You volunteered for it. A pause. Why, Dad? What are you trying to prove? Jack stared out his window at the darkened barracks, searching for an answer that wouldn't sound pathetic. I've got 30 years and 2 months. I want to finish what I started. And if something happens to you, if you don't come back, was it worth it? That was the question, wasn't it? The question Jack had been avoiding for 3 weeks. He thought about his failing eyesight, about the shots he might miss, about the soldiers who depended on his accuracy. I'll come back, Jack said. I promise. That's not a promise you can make. Ryan's voice broke slightly. You know that better than anyone. They talked for another 20 minutes. Ryan trying to convince his father to stand down, Jack holding firm. By the time they hung up, nothing had changed except that both men felt worse than before. Jack lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the barracks settling. In 12 hours, he would be on a transport to Afghanistan. In 4 months, he would either be home with his retirement secured or dead in some godforsaken valley because his eyes had failed him at exactly the wrong moment. The old Jack Hawkins would have been confident, would have trusted his skills, his experience, his ability to adapt and overcome, but that Jack Hawkins had perfect vision and the certainty of youth. This Jack Hawkins had neither. He closed his eyes and forced himself to sleep, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new dangers, and no easy answers. The last thought that crossed his mind before sleep took him was of white feathers and an Afghan interpreter who had once called him teacher. If Rashid Ahmadi was really out there, if the ghost in the mission brief was more than just intelligent speculation, then this deployment was about to become personal in ways that had nothing to do with duty or honor or finishing what he started. It was about to become a reckoning for mistakes made 15 years ago, mistakes that Jack had thought were buried and forgiven. He was about to learn that some sins never die. They just wait in the mountains, patient and cold, for the chance to collect what they're owed. Tomorrow, Jack Hawkins would board a plane and fly toward that reckoning. And somewhere in the Hindu Kush, a man with a rifle and a memory full of ghosts was waiting for him. The game was about to begin. The C-17 Globemaster climbed through turbulence somewhere over the Atlantic, its massive frame shuddering like a living thing. Jack Hawkins sat strapped into a canvas seat along the aircraft's bulkhead, surrounded by soldiers who slept or pretended to sleep, their face young and unlined in the dim red glow of the cabin lights. He had made this journey so many times that the sequence had become ritual. The waiting at Dover, the pre-flight briefing that everyone ignored, the long hours of engine noise and recycled air, the gradual descent into a landscape that wanted you dead. But this time felt different. This time, Jack could feel the weight of his lie pressing down on him with every mile they traveled east. His medical file, falsified with help from a sympathetic records clerk who owed him a favor from Fallujah. His vision, deteriorating with each passing day. His promise to Ryan that he would come home. A promise that felt more fragile than the aluminum skin of the aircraft carrying them toward war. Across the cargo bay, Captain Alicia Reeves sat with her tablet computer, reviewing mission briefs and terrain maps. Even in the red dimness, Jack could see the concentration on her face, the way her eyes tracked across data with the precision of a targeting system. She had been born into a world of smartphones and GPS, where information flowed like water and technology solved problems that Jack's generation had muscled through with grit and stubbornness. Corporal Danny Vega slept in the seat next to Jack, his head lolled back, mouth open, snoring softly. The kid was 23 and looked even younger in sleep, his face smooth and untroubled. Jack remembered being that age, remembered the invincibility that came with youth, the certainty that death was something that happened to other people in other wars. The aircraft hit another pocket of turbulence. Danny jerked awake, eyes wide, hand reaching instinctively for a weapon that wasn't there. Easy, Jack said quietly, just weather. Danny blinked, oriented himself, then relaxed back into his seat. How much longer, Sarge? Jack checked his watch. 4 hours to Bagram, then another 2 by helicopter to Kunar. You nervous? It was an honest question, asked with the guilelessness of someone who didn't yet know that fear was something you learn to wear like a second skin. Jack thought about his answer. Every time, he said, the day you stop being nervous is the day you get killed. Danny nodded like this was profound wisdom instead of simple survival instinct. The kid had been on one deployment, 6 months in Helmand province, most of it spent on a relatively quiet FOB doing perimeter security. This would be his first time operating in truly hostile territory, his first real exposure to an enemy who knew the terrain and had been fighting in these mountains since before Danny was born. Sergeant Hawkins? Danny's voice was quieter now. Can I ask you something? Shoot. That thing Captain Reeves said about technology versus traditional methods. Who's right? Jack was silent for a long moment, watching the rhythmic flash of the wing lights through the small porthole window. How did you explain to a kid raised on video games and instant gratification that sometimes the old ways persisted because they worked, not because old men were too stubborn to change? They're both right, Jack said finally. Technology can give you an edge, better data, faster calculations, more accurate solutions. But technology fails, batteries die, circuits corrode, satellites go dark. When that happens, all you've got is what's between your ears. He tapped his temple. The captain understands this. She's smart enough to use every tool available. But she also knows that at the end of the day, it's not the computer that pulls the trigger. It's the man. Danny absorbed this, then asked the question Jack had been dreading. What about you, Sarge? You ever gonna trust the tech? Jack thought about the ballistic computer waiting for him in his gear, the laser rangefinder he had never learned to use, the thermal optics that turned night into day. He thought about his failing eyesight and the bitter irony that the technology he had spent his career disdaining might be the only thing keeping him effective in the field. I'm learning, Jack said, which was both true and a complete evasion. The rest of the flight passed in fitful sleep and waking dreams. Jack dozed and woke, never quite reaching the deep unconsciousness that would have brought real rest. Each time he opened his eyes, he found himself checking the clarity of his vision, blinking hard, testing his ability to focus on distant objects. The fear was constant now, a low-frequency hum at the base of his skull. What if his eyes failed during a critical moment? What if the next time he lined up a shot, he saw nothing but blur where the target should be? What if someone died because Jack Hawkins was too proud to admit he was broken? Bagram Air Base materialized out of the Afghan dawn like a fever dream made of concrete and concertina wire. The C-17 touched down hard, tires screeching against runway, and taxied to a stop near a cluster of transport helicopters that crouched on the tarmac like predatory insects. Jack gathered his gear, heavy with body armor and ammunition, and filed out of the aircraft into air that already shimmered with heat despite the early hour. Afghanistan smelled exactly the way he remembered. Dust and diesel fuel, burning trash and human waste, the sharp mineral tang of mountains and the underlying sweetness of decay. Some soldiers said all war zones smelled the same. Jack had never found that to be true. Iraq smelled of petroleum and ancient rivers. Afghanistan smelled of stone and time, and the kind of poverty that ground men down to their essential elements. Welcome back, Sergeant. Jack turned to find Major Sarah Chen standing beside one of the helicopters, her uniform crisp despite the heat, her expression unreadable behind dark sunglasses. Jack had worked with Chen on 2 previous deployments. She was sharp, politically savvy, and possessed the rare ability to translate tactical reality into language that rear echelon officers could understand. Major, good to see you. Wish I could say the same about the circumstances. Chen gestured toward the helicopter. We've got a briefing scheduled for 1400 hours, but I wanted to give you the ground truth before you get the sanitized version. Jack set down his gear. I'm listening. The enemy sniper situation is worse than the intelligence reports suggested. We're up to 12 confirmed kills now, plus another 20 wounded. All long-range engagements, all single shot, all during low-light conditions. This guy is good, Jack, better than good. He's systematic, patient, and he never makes mistakes. White feathers? Chen nodded. Every single kill. It's become a psychological operation in itself. Some of the soldiers are getting superstitious about it. Morale is suffering. Jack thought about the mission brief, about the pattern of kills that suggested professional training. What about ballistics? We able to identify the weapon system? 7.62 NATO, Probably a US rifle or a high-quality copy. The shots are consistent enough that it has to be match-grade ammunition and a properly maintained weapon. Chen pulled out her tablet and showed Jack a map dotted with red markers. These are the kill sites. Notice anything? Jack studied the map, his trained eye picking out the pattern immediately. The kills formed a rough arc along the Korangal and Peck valleys, always from elevated positions, always with clear lines of retreat into Pakistan. Whoever was pulling the trigger understood the terrain intimately and had the discipline to shoot and relocate before return fire could be coordinated. He's hurting us, Jack said, pushing our patrol routes into predictable corridors. That's our assessment too, which means either he's preparing for a larger operation or, Chen trailed off, or he's looking for someone specific. Chen's expression confirmed what Jack had already suspected. The white feathers weren't just psychological warfare. They were a signature. A message left for someone who would understand what they meant. The helicopter ride to Firebase Viper took them through some of the most hostile territory on Earth. The Hindu Kush mountains rose on all sides, their peaks still capped with snow despite the summer heat, their flanks scarred with terraces and goat paths that looked like scratches on ancient skin. Below, the Kunar River snaked through valleys that had seen armies rise and fall since Alexander the Great had marched his phalanx through these same passes. Jack pressed his face to the helicopter's window, watching the terrain scroll past. Every ridgeline was a potential firing position. Every compound a possible ambush site. The enemy owned this ground. Coalition forces were just borrowing it, paying rent in blood and treasure, waiting for the day when politicians decided the cost was too high and brought everyone home. Alicia sat across from him, also looking out the window. She caught his eye and had to shout over the rotor noise. "What are you thinking?" "That this place eats empires," Jack shouted back. Alicia smiled grimly. "Then I guess we better not act like an empire." Firebase Viper sat on a plateau overlooking the confluence of two valleys, surrounded by HESCO barriers and guard towers that bristled with weapons. As the helicopter descended, Jack could see soldiers moving between bunkers and command posts, their movements economical and purposeful. This was a base that took contact regularly, where every soldier understood that the perimeter was less a boundary than a suggestion. They touched down in a whirlwind of dust and rotor wash. Jack grabbed his gear and followed Alicia toward a cluster of prefabricated buildings that served as headquarters. The firebase was smaller than he had expected, maybe 200 soldiers total, a mix of conventional forces and special operations types who moved with the casual confidence of men who had seen the elephant and lived to tell about it. The command post was mercifully air-conditioned, a luxury that felt obscene after the furnace heat outside. Major Chen was already there, along with a grizzled-looking sergeant first class who introduced himself as Farid Rahman, Afghan National Army liaison. Farid was 35 but looked 50, his face creased by sun and hardship, his handshake firm enough to convey respect without challenging dominance. He spoke English with a British accent, remnant of training received from coalition partners over the years. "Sergeant Hawkins, Major Chen speaks highly of you." "Sergeant Rahman, pleasure. Please call me Farid. We dispense with formality here. Rank matters less than competence, yes?" His smile revealed teeth yellowed by tea and tobacco. "I understand you will be training my snipers." "That's the plan." Farid's smile faded. "Good, because they are dying, Sergeant, 6 in the past 4 months. Young men with families killed by a ghost they cannot see." He paused. "We need you to teach them how to become ghosts, too." The briefing that followed was comprehensive and grim. Major Chen walked them through the tactical situation, showing drone footage of enemy positions, signals, intelligence intercepts, and the pattern of attacks that had cost 12 American lives and countless Afghan casualties. The enemy sniper, whoever he was, operated with near impunity. He would strike during dawn or dusk when light conditions made thermal optics less effective. He would fire a single shot from extreme range, then disappear into the mountains before quick reaction forces could respond. "We've tried everything," Chen said. "Counter-battery radar, aerial surveillance, ground patrols to known firing positions. He's always one step ahead. It's like he knows our playbook." Jack studied the topographical maps, committing terrain features to memory. The valleys were narrow, the ridgelines high, the distances extreme. This was sniper country, the kind of environment where a skilled marksman with patience and discipline could control entire sectors of battle space. "What about patterns?" Jack asked. "Time of day, target selection, Anything we can predict? Dawn and dusk, like I said. He seems to prefer soft targets, soldiers who are isolated or exposed. Never goes after hard vehicles or prepared positions. And the white feathers. Chen brought up photographs of the calling cards left at kill sites. We've had them analyzed. Common mourning dove feathers, the kind you can find anywhere in Afghanistan. No trace evidence, no fingerprints. Alicia leaned forward. What if we set up our own counter sniper positions? Use his pattern against him? We've tried, he doesn't bite. Either he's got spotters watching our movements, or he's just that cautious. Chen closed her tablet. Which brings us to why you're here. We need fresh eyes, fresh tactics. You've got 3 days to get oriented, then we start running combined patrols with ANA forces. Your mission is to train their snipers while simultaneously hunting this ghost. 3 days. Jack felt the timeline compress around him. 3 days to survey the terrain, zero his rifle, build rapport with the Afghan soldiers he would be training. And all the while, somewhere in the mountains, a skilled shooter was watching and waiting. The team settled into their quarters, a cramped hooch with metal frame bunks and wall lockers that smelled of mildew and old sweat. It was luxury compared to some of the places Jack had slept during his career. At least the roof didn't leak and the floor was level. That first night, Jack lay in his bunk, listening to the sounds of the fire base settling into its night cycle. Generator hum, distant voices, the occasional crack of outgoing artillery fire. Somewhere beyond the wire, in darkness absolute, the mountains waited with their secrets and their dead. His phone buzzed. A message from Ryan, sent hours ago but just delivered through the sporadic satellite connection. Dad, please be careful. I love you. Jack typed back. I will. Love you too. Then he closed his eyes and tried to sleep, knowing that tomorrow would bring challenges he might not be ready to face. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation. Jack met with Fareed's sniper team, 6 Afghan soldiers ranging in age from 19 to 43. They were a mixed group, some with natural talent, others who had been assigned to the role because they were decent shots and someone needed to fill the billet. The best of them was a quiet 35-year-old named Zamirai, a former Mujahideen fighter who had learned to shoot during the Soviet occupation. Zamirai moved with the economy of motion that came from decades of combat. His equipment was old but meticulously maintained. His shooting positions textbook perfect. When Jack watched him engage targets at 800 yards, he saw echoes of techniques that had been developed long before ballistic computers and laser rangefinders. You are good, Jack told him after one particularly impressive string of shots. Zamirai shrugged. The mountains taught me, and the Russians. They were excellent teachers because they killed you if you made mistakes. Jack found himself warming to the old warrior. There was something familiar in Zamirai's economy of movement, his patient approach to shooting, his understanding that marksmanship was less about equipment than mindset. By contrast, the youngest Afghan sniper, a kid named Bashir, struggled with everything. He flinched before shots, jerked the trigger instead of pressing smoothly, breathed at all the wrong moments. But he was eager, arriving early to training sessions and staying late to practice fundamentals. Will he be any good? Alicia asked, watching Bashir miss yet another target at 400 yards. Maybe, Jack said, if he lives long enough to learn. The firebase range was crude compared to Fort Benning. Just a bulldoze firing line and a collection of steel targets set at known distances. But it was enough for Jack to zero his rifle and confirm that his optics were properly aligned. He had brought his personal M24, the same rifle he had carried for the past 8 years. Alicia had also brought the high-tech scope she had tried to give him back at Fort Benning, the one with the integrated ballistic computer and laser rangefinder. You should at least try it, she said, holding out the scope. Jack looked at the device, sleek and modern, bristling with buttons and digital displays. Every instinct screamed at him to refuse, to stick with the simple mil-dot reticle he had used his entire career. But his vision had blurred twice already that morning, brief episodes that left him blinking hard and fighting down panic. Show me how it works, Jack said. Alicia's surprise was visible, but she quickly masked it. She spent the next hour walking Jack through the scope's features. The laser rangefinder that gave instant, accurate distances. The ballistic computer that calculated bullet drop and wind drift based on environmental sensors. The illuminated reticle that adjusted automatically for range. It's not cheating, Alicia said. It's just doing the math faster than you can in your head. Jack sighted through the scope, watching numbers and data populate the display. It felt wrong, like driving a car after a lifetime of walking. But when he took a shot at a 1,000-yard target and watched the bullet impact exactly where the scope predicted, he had to admit there was something to it. "It works," he said grudgingly. "Of course it works. The question is, will you trust it when it matters?" That was the question, wasn't it? Trust had to be earned, not given. And Jack had spent too many years trusting only his own eyes and judgment to suddenly transfer that trust to a piece of silicon and glass. On the third night, Jack found himself unable to sleep. He took his rifle and walked to the observation post on the fire base's western edge, a sandbagged position that looked out over the valley. The moon was nearly full, painting the landscape in shades of silver and black. Somewhere out there, the enemy sniper was sleeping or watching or planning his next kill. "Can't sleep either?" Jack turned to find Sergeant Marcus Kane climbing into the observation post, his own rifle slung across his back. Kane was 38, a lifer like Jack, with a reputation for precision shooting that had earned him 3 deployments and a chest full of medals. "Too much on my mind," Jack said. Kane settled in next to him, pulling out a can of dip and tucking a pinch behind his lower lip. "You know what they're saying, right? About you? I try not to listen to gossip. They're saying you're past your prime, that you should have retired years ago instead of taking up a slot that could go to a younger shooter." Kane spit into an empty bottle. "Thought you should hear it from someone direct instead of behind your back." Jack appreciated the honesty even if the words stung. "What do you think?" "I think age comes for everyone. Some guys have the sense to step aside before it becomes obvious. Others hang on too long and people get hurt." Kane looked out at the moonlit valley. "I've seen your qualification scores, Sergeant Hawkins. They're still good, better than most, but they're not what they used to be. You've slipped maybe 5% over the past year." 5%. The number hung in the air between them. In most professions, 5% would be noise, statistical variance that meant nothing. In long-range shooting, 5% could be the difference between a headshot and a miss, between mission success and catastrophic failure. "I appreciate your candor," Jack said carefully. "I'm not trying to be a dick. I'm trying to keep people alive." Kane turned to face him directly. "If you're not at 100%, you need to tell Captain Reeves. Let someone else take the critical shots. There's no shame in being a teacher instead of a trigger puller." Jack felt anger rise in his chest, hot and immediate. Who was this 38-year-old kid to tell him what he should and shouldn't do? Jack had been making impossible shots when Kane was still in diapers. But beneath the anger was something else. Fear. Because Kane was right. Jack wasn't at 100%. He wasn't even at 90%. And every day that passed took him further from the shooter he used to be. "Noted," Jack said, his voice tight. Kane studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Good luck out there, Sergeant. I hope I'm wrong about you." He climbed down from the observation post, leaving Jack alone with the moonlight and his doubts. The next morning brought their first patrol, a combined operation with Afghan forces to make contact with village elders 15 kilometers northeast of the firebase. Intelligence suggested the area was relatively secure, the villages largely sympathetic to coalition efforts. It would be a good opportunity to build rapport with the Afghans and give Jack's team a feel for the terrain. They rolled out at 600, 4 Humvees carrying 24 soldiers, split evenly between American and Afghan forces. Alicia rode in the lead vehicle, coordinating with their Afghan counterparts. Jack and Danny were in the second Humvee, with Zamarai and young Bashir riding him back. The valley was beautiful in the early morning light, all golden hues and long shadows. Farmers were already in their fields, working terraces that had been cultivated for thousands of years. Children watched from doorways as the convoy passed, their faces solemn and unreadable. "Doesn't look that dangerous," Danny said, his voice optimistic. "That's when it's most dangerous," Zamarai said from the back seat, his English accented but clear. "The quiet before storm, yes?" They were an hour into the patrol when the first sign of trouble came. Alicia's voice crackled over the radio, tight with tension. "All vehicles, we've got movement on the ridgeline approximately 2 miles northeast. Single individual, elevated position. Sniper team, I need eyes on that position now." Jack grabbed his rifle and climbed out of the Humvee, using the vehicle for cover while he scanned the ridgeline through his scope. The distance was extreme, nearly 3,000 yards, right at the edge of effective range for his weapon system. There, a flash of movement, barely visible, someone repositioning among the rocks. "I've got possible contact," Jack reported. "Can't confirm hostile intent from this range." Then the world exploded into violence. The first shot came without warning, the supersonic crack of a bullet arriving before the sound of the gunshot. It clipped the antenna off the lead Humvee, a precision shot from an impossible distance. "Contact! Contact! Sniper fire from the northeast ridge!" Jack tracked back along the bullet's trajectory, searching for the shooter through his scope. The distance was staggering. At 3,000 yards, his target would be barely visible even through high magnification optics. A second shot rang out, this one impacting the dirt 20 feet from where Specialist Torres, their radio man, was setting up communications equipment. Another message: "I can hit whatever I want." "Jesus Christ," Danny breathed. That shot came from way out there. Had to be at least a mile and a half. More like 2 miles, Jack thought grimly. Whoever was shooting wasn't just good. He was operating at the absolute edge of what was physically possible with small arms. "Kane, can you get a firing solution?" Alicia's voice was controlled but urgent. Jack watched through his binoculars as Marcus Kane set up in a hasty firing position, his rifle equipped with all the latest technology. Laser rangefinder painting the target area. Ballistic computer calculating solutions. Wind meter measuring atmospheric conditions. Kane fired. The shot echoed across the valley, followed by tense silence. "Negative impact," Kane reported, frustration evident. "Wind caught it, adjusting." The enemy sniper's response was immediate and brutal. Another shot, this one so close to Kane's position that it kicked up dust in his face. The message was clear. "I see you. I can kill you whenever I choose." "All units, fall back to secondary positions," Alicia ordered. "We need to break contact and establish defensive posture." But breaking contact was easier said than done. The convoy was strung out along the valley floor, exposed and vulnerable. Every time a vehicle tried to move, another precise shot would crack past, forcing them back into cover. Jack studied the situation through his scope, his mind racing through tactical options. The enemy had the high ground, extreme range, and clearly superior skills. Trying to assault his position would be suicide. Calling in artillery risked hitting civilian areas. Air support was at least 40 minutes away. They were pinned, helpless, exactly where the enemy sniper wanted them. And then things got worse. "Multiple contacts south side," someone shouted. "We've got fighters moving in from the village." Through his binoculars, Jack could see them. 20, maybe 25 Taliban fighters, moving with practiced efficiency, using terrain for cover, advancing on the pinned convoy from multiple directions. The sniper hadn't been trying to kill them. He had been holding them in place for an ambush. The valley erupted in gunfire. American and Afghan soldiers returned fire, trying to establish a defensive perimeter while simultaneously dealing with the sniper threat from above. It was chaos, the kind of fluid tactical nightmare that turned battles into slaughters. Jack saw young Bashir, the Afghan sniper, freeze up completely. The kid stood exposed, his rifle shaking in his hands, unable to process the violence unfolding around him. "Bashir, get down," Jack shouted, but his voice was lost in the gunfire. A Taliban fighter appeared from behind a compound wall, his AK-47 swinging toward the paralyzed Afghan soldier. Jack didn't think. He raised his rifle, found the target through his scope, and pressed the trigger. The Taliban fighter dropped, the shot clean through the chest at 400 yards. But Jack's victory was short-lived. As he tracked for additional targets, his vision suddenly blurred, the world dissolving into meaningless shapes and colors. He blinked hard, once, twice, panic rising in his throat. "Not now, please, not now." His vision cleared, but precious seconds had been lost. Seconds where soldiers were fighting and dying while their supposed expert sniper sat blinking like an idiot. Danny was beside him, calling out wind conditions and target locations, his voice steady despite the chaos. "Sarge, we've got fighters at the compound wall 300 yards. I can spot for you." Jack forced himself to focus, to push down the fear and function like the professional he was supposed to be. He worked his way through targets, each shot precise and economical. The muscle memory of 30 years took over, his hands moving with automatic efficiency, even while his mind screamed warnings about failing eyes and missions that should have been refused. Zmarai, the old Afghan sniper, had taken position on the other side of the Humvee. He worked his ancient rifle with practiced calm, firing methodical shots that found targets with impressive consistency. Between the two of them, they began to turn the tide, picking off Taliban fighters who thought they had easy prey. But up on the ridge, the ghost sniper continued his deadly work. Another shot, perfectly placed, taking down Sergeant Lee from Kane's team. The man dropped without a sound, a headshot from over 2 miles away. "Man down, Lee's hit!" Jack felt cold rage settle over him. This wasn't random violence, this was execution, carried out by someone who understood the mathematics of death and had the skill to convert calculations into corpses. "Captain Reeves, we need to get counter-sniper fire on that ridge," Jack called over the radio. "Working on it, Sergeant." Kane's trying to range him now. Jack watched Marcus Kane work through his firing solution, using every piece of technology available to calculate the impossible shot. The ballistic computer, the laser rangefinder, the wind meters and atmospheric sensors, all the tools that Alicia had argued would give them an advantage. Kane fired and missed. The enemy sniper fired back, missed Kane by inches, deliberate intimidation. "I can't get a clean solution," Kane reported, his professional calm cracking. "The wind is too variable at this range. Computer keeps giving me different corrections." Technology had failed, just like Jack had always warned it would. The irony would have been funny if people weren't dying. Jack looked through his scope at the distant ridge, calculating angles and distances in his head. 3,000 yards, give or take. Winds gusting between 10 and 15 miles per hour. Direction shifting. Temperature differential between the valley floor and the ridge, creating unpredictable air currents. It was beyond the effective range of his weapon, beyond what any reasonable person would attempt. But Jack had never been particularly reasonable. "Danny, I need you to spot for me. Watch for impact and give me corrections." "Sarge, that's got to be 3,000 yards. That's impossible." "Nothing's impossible if you're good enough. Now spot for me." Jack settled into his shooting position, feeling the familiar calm descend. The world narrowed. The gunfire around him faded to background noise. There was only the rifle, the target, and the space between them. He studied the mirage, reading the invisible currents of heated air rising from the valley floor. Felt the wind on his face, estimating speed and direction. Calculated bullet drop in his head, the numbers flowing as naturally as breathing. His vision blurred again. Jack closed his eyes, counted to 3, opened them. The world swam back into focus, but his confidence was shattered. How could he make this shot when he couldn't even trust his own eyes? Then he remembered Alicia's words. "It's not cheating, it's just doing the math faster." Jack activated the advanced scope she had given him. The laser rangefinder painted the target, 3,147 yards. The ballistic computer began calculating, feeding him corrections based on environmental data that his failing eyes and aging brain might have miscalculated. The reticle adjusted automatically, compensating for distance and wind. All Jack had to do was trust it. Trust the technology he had spent his career dismissing. Trust that machines could do what men could not. He took a breath, let it out slow, felt his heartbeat settle into rhythm. The crosshairs steadied on a point in empty air, 30 feet above the distant figure on the ridge. "Sending it," Jack whispered, and pressed the trigger. The rifle bucked. The bullet began its 5-second journey across the valley, arcing high into the thin mountain air before beginning its long descent toward the target. 5 seconds where the entire patrol seemed to hold its breath. 5 seconds where Jack wondered if he had just wasted a round on an impossible shot, or if the technology he had distrusted had just saved all their lives. The enemy sniper's position erupted in dust and fragments. "Hit!" Danny screamed. "Holy shit, Sarge, you hit him!" Through his binoculars, Jack could see a figure tumbling backward, falling from the rocks, disappearing into the boulders below. The shooting from the ridge stopped immediately. Around the convoy, the Taliban fighters who had been pressing their attack suddenly lost their nerve. Without their sniper pinning the Americans in place, the firefight shifted decisively. They began to retreat, breaking contact and melting back into the compounds and fields they had emerged from. "Cease fire! Cease fire!" Alicia ordered. "Let them run! Corpsman, we need medical on Lee's position now." Jack lowered his rifle, his hands shaking with adrenaline and relief. He had made the shot, against all odds, against his failing vision and every statistical probability. He had reached out across more than 3,000 yards and eliminated a threat that had been systematically destroying his team. But the victory felt hollow, because Jack knew the truth that nobody else could see. He hadn't made that shot through skill and experience. He had made it through technology, the very technology he had spent his career arguing against. The admission felt like betrayal, Like everything he had believed about his profession had been proven wrong in the space of a single trigger pull. Alicia appeared beside him, her face streaked with dust and sweat. Sergeant Hawkins, that was extraordinary shooting. 3,000 yards in combat conditions. I've never seen anything like it. Jack wanted to tell her the truth, that without her scope, without the ballistic computer and laser rangefinder, he would have missed by 20 feet, that his eyes had failed him twice during the firefight, that he was a fraud who had no business being here. Instead, he said, "Just lucky, Captain. Luck doesn't account for consistent performance, Sergeant. That was skill." Before Jack could respond, Marcus Kane approached, his expression unreadable. "Hell of a shot, Hawkins. I had every technological advantage and couldn't touch him. You made it look easy." "It wasn't easy," Jack said quietly. "No, I don't imagine it was." Kane looked out toward the ridge where the enemy sniper had fallen. "We should send a team up there, confirm the kill, collect intelligence." Alicia nodded. "Agreed, but not tonight. We extract back to the fire base, regroup, then come back tomorrow with proper support." The convoy limped back to Firebase Viper as the sun set behind the mountains, painting everything in shades of red and gold. Sergeant Lee was in the medical vehicle, unconscious but stable. The medics said he would live, though he would be going home with a purple heart and a scar that would never quite fade. That night, Jack sat in the Firebase's makeshift chapel, a converted storage container with wooden benches and a cross made from scrap metal. He wasn't particularly religious, but something about the day's events had left him needing a moment of quiet reflection. Fareed found him there, the old Afghan warrior moving with the silence of a man who had spent his life in war zones. "May I sit?" Jack nodded. They sat in silence for a while, two soldiers who understood that some experiences transcended words. Finally, Fareed spoke. "That was the ghost, the sniper who has been killing my men. You hit him today." "Maybe. We won't know until we check the position tomorrow." "I know. I have fought in these mountains for 20 years. I know the difference between a miss and a hit." Fareed paused. "The shot you made today, it was not possible. And yet you made it." "I had help, technology." Fareed smiled. "Yes, and also skill, and experience, and perhaps something else. Call it luck, call it fate, call it the will of God. But you saved lives today, Sergeant Hawkins, mine included." Jack felt the weight of the day settling on him like physical pressure. "I'm not the man I used to be, Fareed. I'm slower, weaker. My eyes are failing. I don't know how much longer I can do this." "Then you are exactly like the rest of us," Fareed said gently. "We are all failing, all dying, all one day closer to the end. The question is not how long you can fight. The question is whether you will fight with honor while you still can." It was the kind of wisdom that came from a lifetime of war, distilled into simple truth. Jack nodded slowly. "Thank you." "No, Sergeant, thank you for my life, for my men's lives, for showing us that even impossible shots can be made if you are brave enough to try." After Fareed left, Jack pulled out his phone and sent a message to Ryan. "Made a tough shot today. Thinking about what Mom would say about the choices I'm making. Miss you both." The reply came an hour later. "Mom would say you're stubborn and brave and she loves you. So do I. Stay safe, old man." Jack smiled despite himself. Old man, yeah, that was about right. But maybe being old wasn't the curse he had thought it was. Maybe there was wisdom in accepting help, in adapting to change, in using every tool available instead of clinging to the past. He thought about tomorrow's mission, when they would climb to the ridge and confirm whether the ghost was truly dead. Thought about the white feather that would surely be found among the rocks and shell casings. Thought about all the soldiers who might live because one stubborn old sniper had finally learned that pride was less important than performance. Jack closed his eyes and tried to sleep, knowing that the real test was still ahead. Because if the ghost was dead, they had solved one problem. But if he was alive, if Jack's shot had missed or only wounded him, then they had just made an enemy even more dangerous by proving they could hit him. Either way, tomorrow would bring answers. Jack just hoped he would be ready for them. Outside, the mountains kept their secrets. And somewhere in the darkness, a wounded predator might be watching, waiting, planning his revenge against the old sniper who had dared to challenge him across an impossible distance. The game was far from over. Dawn broke over Firebase Viper like a wound opening across the sky, all crimson and gold bleeding into the pale blue of morning. Jack Hawkins had been awake for hours, sitting in the observation post with his rifle across his lap, watching the mountains emerge from darkness like the bones of some ancient beast. He had not slept, could not sleep, because somewhere up on that ridge, 3,000 yards from where yesterday's firefight had erupted into chaos, there might be a body. And if there was a body, there would be answers to questions Jack had been avoiding for 15 years. The mission brief was simple. A reinforced patrol would climb to the enemy sniper's position, confirm the kill, and collect whatever intelligence could be gathered. Alicia would lead the ground element. Jack would provide overwatch with Danny as his spotter, positioned on a neighboring ridge that offered clear sight lines to the target area. It was textbook counter-sniper work, the kind of operation Jack had run dozens of times across multiple deployments. But nothing about this felt textbook. Jack's hands trembled slightly as he performed his pre-mission checks. Rifle cleaned and oiled, ammunition counted and staged, optics verified and zeroed. The advanced scope that Alicia had given him sat mounted on his rail, its digital display dark and waiting. Jack stared at it, remembering yesterday's shot, the way the technology had compensated for his failing eyes and turned an impossible engagement into a confirmed hit. He had spent 30 years trusting nothing but his own skill. And in a single moment of crisis, he had abandoned that faith and let machines do what his body could no longer manage. The shame of it sat in his chest like a stone. "Sarge, you good?" Danny Vega climbed into the observation post, his gear rattling softly, his young face showing the strain of too little sleep and too much combat in too short a time. The kid had performed well yesterday, calling wind and spotting impacts with the calm efficiency of someone twice his age. Jack made a mental note to put him in for a commendation. "Fine, just thinking. About the shot, man, everyone's talking about it. 3,000 yards in combat. That's going to be legend, Sarge. Legend." The word tasted bitter, because legends were built on truth, and yesterday's shot was built on technology and desperation and eyes that could no longer be trusted to see what needed seeing. "It was luck," Jack said. "No way. I saw you work that solution. The way you read the wind, compensated for the mirage, adjusted for the angle. That wasn't luck. That was mastery. If only the kid knew." But Jack couldn't bring himself to shatter Danny's illusions. The Corps needed heroes, needed stories of impossible shots and unbeatable snipers. The truth that even the best eventually failed and had to rely on crutches to stay in the fight was not the kind of story that inspired young soldiers. "Let's get ready to move," Jack said, ending the conversation before it could go deeper into uncomfortable territory. They geared up in silence, checking radios and confirming frequencies. Below, the fire base was coming alive with pre-dawn activity. Soldiers moving to assembly areas, vehicles being staged, weapons being loaded. The patrol would consist of 20 soldiers, a mix of American and Afghan forces, all under Alicia's tactical command. Jack watched Captain Reeves brief her team in the fire base courtyard, her movements precise and confident. She had grown into her authority over the past few years, learning to balance decisiveness with flexibility, aggression with caution. She would make a fine commander someday, probably end up running an entire battalion or maybe even a brigade. The kind of career Jack might have had if he had been born into a different generation, one that valued education and staff work as much as trigger time. But Jack had always been a trigger puller. It was all he knew, all he had ever wanted to be. The thought of sitting behind a desk, pushing papers and attending meetings made his skin crawl. Better to burn out in the mountains than fade away in some air-conditioned office building. Marcus Kane appeared at Jack's position, his rifle slung across his back, his expression unreadable in the pre-dawn gloom. "Hawkins, Captain wants us on the northern ridge before the patrol moves out. We'll be providing overwatch while they climb." "Roger that." They moved out in darkness, Jack and Danny and Kane and his spotter, a quiet specialist named Morrison. The climb took 90 minutes, scrambling up goat paths and rocky slopes that seemed designed to break ankles and shred knees. Jack felt every one of his 54 years in the protest of muscles and joints that had been abused by decades of hard use. Kane moved with the easy grace of someone 15 years younger. He didn't gloat about it, didn't make any comments about Jack's labored breathing or the way Jack had to stop twice to let his heart rate settle. But the comparison was implicit. Here was the future of Army snipers, and here was the past, struggling to keep up. They reached their position just as the sky lightened enough to see without night vision. The overwatch point offered clear fields of fire across the valley, with unobstructed views of both the patrol route and the distant ridge where yesterday's enemy sniper had operated. Jack set up his rifle, building a stable shooting position from rocks in his pack. Through his scope, he could see the target ridge in detail now. A tumble of boulders and scraggly vegetation clinging to steep slopes. 100 places to hide, 1,000 angles to shoot from. Perfect sniper country. Overwatch in position, Kane reported over the radio. We have eyes on the objective. Alicia's voice came back crisp and professional. Roger, Overwatch. Patrol is moving out now. Estimated time to objective, 45 minutes. Jack watched through his optics as the patrol left the firebase. A file of soldiers moving with practiced caution through terrain that wanted them dead. They spread out properly, maintaining intervals, using available cover. Good tactics, professional execution. But tactics and professionalism only mattered if the enemy cooperated. And the enemy in these mountains had a habit of writing their own rules. The climb progressed without incident. 30 minutes passed, then 40. Jack's eyes began to burn from the strain of constant observation, tracking the patrol's movement while simultaneously scanning for threats. Twice his vision blurred, and he had to blink hard to clear it, his heart racing with the fear that this would be the moment when his eyes failed completely and someone died because of it. Patrol is approaching the objective, Alicia reported. Overwatch, maintain surveillance. We're going in. Through his scope, Jack watched Alicia lead her team onto the ridge. They moved in bounds, some soldiers providing cover while others advanced, professional and careful. The position where Jack's bullet had impacted was easy to identify, a scatter of disturbed rocks in scraped earth where something heavy had fallen. We've got a body, Alicia's voice carried a note of grim satisfaction. Confirming now, Jack's finger tightened on his rifle stock. This was the moment, the confirmation that his shot had found its mark, that the ghost who had killed 12 Americans and terrorized an entire province was dead. But something felt wrong. Jack couldn't articulate what exactly, just a creeping sense of wrongness that made the hair on his neck stand up. He scanned the surrounding ridges through his scope, looking for anything out of place. A glint of metal, a flash of movement, the telltale straight line in nature that indicated human presence. Nothing. Overwatch, this is Reeves. We've got a problem. Jack's blood went cold. What kind of problem, Captain? The body. It's not who we thought it was. A pause, heavy with implications. It's American. The words hit Jack like a physical blow. American. The enemy sniper he had shot, the ghost who had been killing coalition soldiers with impunity, was American. Can you identify him? Jack heard himself ask. Stand by. Sounds of movement, urgent voices conferring. Then Alicia came back on the radio, her voice tight. Sergeant Kyle Brennan, according to his dog tags. But that doesn't make sense. Brennan is listed as MIA, presumed dead, from an operation 6 months ago. Jack's mind raced through the implications. An American soldier missing for half a year, turning up dead on an Afghan ridgeline with a sniper rifle and evidence of long-term habitation. It painted a picture that Jack didn't want to believe but couldn't ignore. Captain, you need to get your people off that ridge, now. Why? What are you seeing? Nothing, that's the problem. If Brennan was the sniper, where's his weapon? Where's his gear? And why would an American soldier be operating against coalition forces? The silence on the other end told Jack that Alicia was reaching the same conclusion he had. This wasn't the end of the hunt, it was a trap. All units, fall back to Rally Point Alpha. We're extracting immediately. But the enemy had been waiting for exactly that order. As the patrol began their tactical withdrawal, the mountain came alive with gunfire. Muzzle flashes erupted from multiple positions. A coordinated ambush that had been planned with the patience of someone who understood exactly how Americans would react to finding one of their own dead. Contact! Contact from multiple directions! Jack swung his rifle toward the nearest threat, a cluster of fighters approximately 800 yards out. Through his scope, he could see them moving with practiced efficiency, not the usual rabble of Taliban conscripts, but something more professional, more dangerous. He fired, worked the bolt, fired again. 2 targets down. But for every fighter he dropped, 2 more seemed to appear. Beside him, Marcus Kane was engaging targets with mechanical precision, his advanced optics and ballistic computer allowing him to make shots that would have been guesswork for lesser shooters. But even Kane's technology couldn't overcome simple mathematics. They were outnumbered, outflanked, and the patrol was caught in a kill zone with limited options for escape. Overwatch, we're taking heavy fire. Need immediate suppression on grid Victor, Sierra 479er. Jack consulted his map. found the grid coordinates, and began engaging targets in that sector. The work was automatic now, muscle memory taking over. Acquire target, range, wind call, fire, bolt. Next target. The rhythm of it was almost meditative, a deadly dance he had performed so many times that conscious thought was unnecessary. But the strain was showing. His vision blurred twice in the space of 30 seconds. Each time he had to pause, blink, refocus. Precious seconds wasted while soldiers died in the valley below. "Sarge, you okay?" Danny's voice was concerned. The kid had noticed. "Fine, keep spotting." It wasn't fine. Nothing was fine. Jack was falling apart in the middle of a firefight, and people were going to die because of it. Then, cutting through the chaos of gunfire and radio chatter, came a voice that Jack had not heard in 15 years but recognized instantly. "Hello, old friend." The radio frequency was encrypted. Coalition forces only. Whoever was speaking had access to American communications equipment and knew exactly which channel to use. Jack's blood turned to ice. "Did anyone else hear that?" Alicia demanded. "Affirmative," Kane replied. "Someone's on our net." For the man who taught me everything, when the voice continued, calm and almost conversational, despite the violence unfolding below. "Did you really think one bullet would be enough?" Jack keyed his radio, his voice steady despite the horror dawning in his chest. "Rashid?" Silence, then, "You remember, good. I was afraid you had forgotten me like you forgot my family." Around Jack, the world seemed to contract to a single point of terrible clarity. The voice on the radio, the professional ambush, the white feathers left at kill sites, all of it pointing to a conclusion that Jack had suspected but desperately hoped was wrong. The ghost wasn't dead, had never been in danger of dying, because the body on the ridge wasn't the enemy sniper. It was bait. "Captain Reeves," Jack said, forcing calm into his voice, "the man you're looking for isn't on that ridge. He's somewhere else, watching, waiting." "How do you know that, Sergeant?" "Because I trained him. Because I taught him every trick I know. Because 15 years ago I called in an airstrike that killed his wife and daughters and turned an ally into an enemy who has been waiting all this time for revenge." But Jack couldn't say any of that over an open channel. So instead he said, "Trust me, Captain. You need to extract now." Alicia Reeves had not survived 3 combat deployments by ignoring warning signs. "All units, break contact and move to extraction point, Bravo, Overwatch, cover our withdrawal." Jack and Kane poured suppressive fire into the enemy positions, making it costly for the ambushers to pursue. Slowly, with agonizing care, the patrol fought their way out of the kill zone and began the descent back toward the firebase. But Rashid wasn't finished. "Tell me, teacher, how are your eyes?" The question was so unexpected, so precisely targeted at Jack's deepest fear, that for a moment he couldn't respond. How could Rashid know? How could he possibly know about the macular degeneration, the failing vision, the secret that Jack had hidden from everyone? Unless he had been watching, studying, learning Jack's patterns the same way Jack had once taught him to study enemy snipers. "I see well enough," Jack replied. "Do you?" "I have been watching you, old friend. I have seen you hesitate. I have seen you blink and squint and struggle with distances that once would have been simple. You are dying, Sergeant Hawkins, dying slowly, going blind like the justice you deserve." Jack's finger tightened on his trigger. If he could locate Rashid's position, if he could get just one clear shot, this would all be over. But Rashid was too smart for that. He was broadcasting from somewhere beyond visual range, safe and untouchable. "The man you killed yesterday," Rashid continued, "Sergeant Brennan, he was a good soldier, a good man. And I killed him 3 days ago and left him on that ridge because I knew you would come. I knew you could not resist the chance to confirm your victory." A pause. "But there is no victory here, teacher. Only payment for debts long overdue." The radio went silent. Jack had sat in his shooting position, his heart hammering, his hands shaking with rage and fear, and the terrible weight of old sins coming due. Around him, the mountains seemed to press in, hostile and patient, full of memories and ghosts. "Hawkins!" Marcus Kane's voice was quiet. What the hell was that about? Jack didn't answer. Couldn't answer. Because any explanation would require confessing things that he had buried deep and never intended to excavate, would require admitting that the enemy sniper terrorizing Kunar province wasn't random Taliban. He was personal. He was Jack's fault. The patrol made it back to Firebase Viper without further contact. Casualties were light, 3 wounded, none critical. But the psychological damage was severe. The realization that an American soldier had been killed and used as bait, that the enemy had access to coalition communications, that their supposedly secure radio frequencies had been compromised. All of it combined to create an atmosphere of paranoid uncertainty. Colonel Garrett flew in from Bagram within hours of receiving Alicia's after-action report. He found Jack in the chapel, sitting in the same spot where Fareed had offered wisdom the night before. "Jack, we need to talk." Jack looked up at his old friend, seeing the concern and confusion written on Garrett's face. The colonel closed the door and sat down heavily on the bench beside Jack. "I just spent an hour being briefed on what happened up there. An American KIA used as bait, enemy forces with access to our comms, and a voice on the radio that seems to know you personally." Garrett's voice was careful, measured. "I need you to tell me what's going on. All of it. No bullshit." Jack sat silent for the long moment, trying to figure out where to begin. "How did you explain 15 years of guilt compressed into a single terrible decision?" "His name is Rashid Ahmadi," Jack said finally. "He was our interpreter in Helmand Province, 2009. Smart kid, maybe 25 years old, natural gift for languages and shooting." Garrett waited, his expression unreadable. "I trained him, taught him marksmanship, taught him to think like a sniper. He was good, Jim, really good. Could have been one of the best if he'd been American, if he'd had access to proper training and equipment." Jack's voice roughened. "He trusted me, called me teacher, looked up to me like I was something special." "What happened?" "We were tracking a high-value target. Taliban commander operating out of a compound in Sangin. Intel said he was planning a major attack, that we had a narrow window to take him out. I was assigned to provide surveillance, confirm the target, call in the strike." Jack closed his eyes, remembering. "I did my job, watched the compound for 3 days, saw men with weapons going in and out, saw someone who matched the description of our target. When command gave the order, I confirmed positive identification and cleared the airstrike." Garrett's expression told Jack he already knew how this story ended. It wasn't a Taliban compound, it was a wedding. 47 civilians killed, including Rashid's wife and 2 daughters, ages 4 and 7. Jack's voice cracked. "The intel was wrong. Someone had given us bad coordinates, or the Taliban commander had moved. Or maybe he was never there at all. I don't know. What I know is that I called in a strike that killed children. That turned my friend into an orphan and a widower in the space of 30 seconds. Jesus, Jack. Rashid disappeared that night. Intel assumed he'd defected to the Taliban, but we never got confirmation. He just vanished into the mountains like a ghost." Jack looked at Garrett. "And now he's back, and he's using everything I taught him to kill Americans. Because of me." Garrett sat back, processing the information. When he spoke, his voice was gentle. "That wasn't your fault. You were working with the intelligence you had. Bad intel gets people killed in war. It's tragic, but it's not murder. Try telling that to Rashid." "I'm telling it to you because you need to hear it." Garrett paused. "But we've got a bigger problem now. If Ahmadi really is the sniper who's been operating in this province, and if he's got a personal vendetta against you specifically, then this whole mission just changed complexion." Jack nodded. He had been thinking the same thing. "I need to pull you out," Garrett continued. "Send you back to Bagram, maybe stateside, because if you're the target, then everyone around you is in danger." "No, Jack, this isn't negotiable. I can't have a senior NCO compromised by personal history with an enemy combatant. Rashid isn't after revenge on some random American soldiers. He's after me, specifically me, which means the safest place for everyone else is with me in the field, where I can draw him out and end this." Jack met Garrett's eyes. "I'm the only one who can stop him, Jim, because I'm the only one who knows how he thinks. You're also the one he wants dead. Then let's give him a chance to try." Garrett studied Jack for a long moment. "There's something else going on here. Something you're not telling me." Jack hesitated, then made a decision. If he was going to ask Garrett to trust him, he owed the colonel the truth, all of it. "My eyes are failing. Macular degeneration. I've got maybe 3 months before I'm legally blind." The words came out in a rush, a confession that had been building for weeks. "I should have reported it, should have let the medical board ground me, but I wanted one more deployment, wanted to hit 30 years before I retired, so I falsified my medical records and lied to everyone." Garrett's face went through a series of expressions. Shock, anger, concern, all cycling too fast to separate. "That shot yesterday," Jack continued, "the one everyone's calling legendary. I made it using the ballistic computer that Captain Reeves gave me. because my eyes couldn't track the target well enough to do it the old way. I'm falling apart, Jim, and people are going to die if I don't either get better or get out. Then get out. Right now, I'll have you on a helicopter within the hour. And let Rashid keep killing. Let him terrorize this province until someone finally gets lucky and takes him down. How many more Americans die while we wait for that? That's not your responsibility. Yes, it is. I created this problem. I'm going to fix it. Garrett stood, pacing the small chapel. You're asking me to let a partially blind sniper with falsified medical records continue operating in a combat zone against an enemy with a personal vendetta. Do you understand how insane that sounds? I do? And you're asking anyway. I am. Garrett was silent for a long time, staring at the makeshift cross on the wall. When he spoke, his voice was heavy with the weight of command decisions that had no good answers. I should court-martial you, pull you out of here in restraints if necessary, but you won't. No, because I've known you for 20 years, and in all that time, you've never asked me for anything. Not promotions, not cushy assignments, not special treatment. You've just done your job, quietly and professionally, and made everyone around you better. Garrett turned to face Jack. So I'm going to give you a chance to finish what you started. But there are conditions. Name them. First, you work with Captain Reeves. Full disclosure, no going rogue. If she tells you to stand down, you stand down. Second, you use every technological advantage available. I don't care about your pride or your philosophy on traditional methods. You use the tools that give you the best chance of survival. And third, the moment your condition compromises the mission or puts soldiers at risk, you pull yourself out. No arguments, no debate. Understood? Understood. Good. Now get out of here and figure out how to kill a ghost. Jack stood, feeling lighter than he had in weeks. The truth was out, at least with Garrett. The burden of secrecy, of lying to a man who had earned better, had been crushing him slowly. Now, with everything in the open, he could focus on the mission. He found Alicia in the operations center, studying satellite imagery and drone footage. She looked up when Jack entered, her expression carefully neutral. Sergeant, I was hoping we could talk. Captain. Alicia gestured to a chair. Jack sat, waiting for whatever was coming. He had a feeling this conversation was going to be difficult. I've been briefed on the situation by Colonel Garrett about Rashid Ahmadi, about what happened in 2009, about the personal nature of this engagement. She paused. He also told me about your eyes. Jack felt his jaw tighten. I can still do my job. Can you? Because from where I'm sitting, you've been lying to your chain of command about a medical condition that directly impacts your ability to function. That's not just unethical, Sergeant. It's criminal. I know. Do you? Because 12 Americans are dead. And if your condition caused you to miss a shot, to hesitate at a critical moment, then those deaths are on you. The accusation stung because it was partially true. Jack couldn't know for certain that his failing eyesight hadn't contributed to the ghost's success. Couldn't prove that a younger, healthier sniper in his position wouldn't have stopped Rashid weeks ago. You're right, Jack said quietly. I should have reported it, should have stepped aside, but I didn't. And now we're here. Alicia's expression softened slightly. Colonel Garrett wants you to stay on the mission. He thinks you're our best chance of stopping Ahmadi. I'm not sure I agree, but I'm willing to give you the benefit of the doubt. She leaned forward. But understand this. You are not in charge. I am. And if I think your condition is putting lives at risk, I will pull you out myself. Are we clear? Crystal. Good. Then let's talk about how we're going to hunt a ghost. They spent the next hour going over intelligence, building a psychological profile of Rashid Ahmadi based on what Jack knew and what their recent encounters had revealed. The picture that emerged was of a patient, methodical operator who had spent years preparing for this confrontation. He knew the terrain intimately. He had access to American equipment and communications. And he understood exactly how coalition forces would respond to various tactical situations. He's been studying us, Alicia said, pointing to a map marked with engagement sites. Look at the pattern. Every contact has been designed to push us into predictable responses. The ambushes, the kill zones, even using Brennan's body as bait, it's all calculated to manipulate our decision-making. He learned that from me, Jack said. I taught him that the best way to win a gunfight is to control where and when it happens. Make the enemy come to you on your terms. So how do we turn that against him? Jack studied the map, thinking about what he knew of Rashid's psychology. The man was driven by revenge, but he wasn't stupid. He wouldn't take unnecessary risks. wouldn't expose himself without multiple escape routes and contingency plans. We give him what he wants, Jack said slowly. Me, isolated, vulnerable. He won't be able to resist. Absolutely not. That's suicide. Not if we do it right. Not if we use me as bait the same way he used Brennan. Jack pointed to a ridge complex about 5 kilometers from the firebase. This area offers multiple long-range firing positions, all with good fields of fire and excellent avenues of escape into Pakistan. If I was going to set up for a final confrontation, that's where I'd do it. Alicia shook her head. Even if Rashid takes the bait, even if he exposes himself, you can't make that shot. Not at that range, not with your condition. You're right, I can't. Jack met her eyes. But you can, and so can Kane. We set up a 3-position overwatch. I draw Rashid out, you and Kane provide the killing shot. He'll be focused on me, won't see the flanking fire until it's too late. It was bold, risky, the kind of plan that could go wrong in 100 different ways, but it was also the kind of plan that might actually work against an opponent who thought he had already won. Alicia considered it, running through scenarios and contingencies. Finally, she nodded. We'll need more assets. Surveillance drones, quick reaction force on standby, medical evacuation pre-staged. This isn't something we can do with just a handful of snipers. Agreed. And you need to be prepared for the possibility that Rashid won't show, that he's patient enough to wait us out. Jack smiled grimly. He'll show, because for the past 15 years he's been waiting for the chance to kill me face to face, to look me in the eye while he takes everything I took from him. He's not going to pass up that opportunity. They spent the rest of the day planning the operation, wargaming scenarios, identifying potential complications. By evening, they had a workable plan, risky, dependent on multiple factors aligning correctly, but workable. Jack found Danny Vega in the chow hall, eating mechanically while staring at nothing. Kid, you okay? Danny looked up, and Jack saw the strain written on his young face. Just thinking about Sergeant Lee, about how close that bullet came. If the ghost had adjusted just a few inches, Lee would be dead instead of wounded. But he didn't, and Lee's going to be fine. This time? What about next time? What about when it's me and those crosshairs? Danny's voice dropped. I'm scared, Sarge, and I don't know how to not be scared. Jack sat down across from him. You think I'm not scared? You think any of us aren't? You never show it, because showing it doesn't help. But feeling it, that's what keeps you alive. Fear makes you cautious, makes you check your corners and trust your training. The soldiers who aren't scared are the ones who get killed doing something stupid. Danny absorbed this, seemed to take some comfort from it. What's it like? When you make a long shot like yesterday, what are you feeling? Jack thought about the question, about the strange calm that descended when he looked through a scope. Nothing, everything. It's hard to explain. The world gets very simple, very clear. There's just the rifle, the target, and the space between them. Everything else falls away. Even the fear? Especially the fear. They sat in companionable silence for a while, 2 soldiers from different generations finding common ground and shared experience. Sarge, can I ask you something personal? Shoot. Do you think we make a difference here, like really make a difference? Or are we just going through the motions until politicians decide we've done enough? It was the kind of question that had no good answer. Jack had asked himself the same thing across 6 deployments, watching friends die for objectives that would be abandoned 6 months later, training local forces who would fold at the first sign of real resistance. I think we make a difference to the people we save. The soldiers who come home because we did our job right. The villagers who don't get killed by Taliban because we disrupted their operations. Jack paused. Whether that difference matters in the big picture? I don't know, but it matters to the people involved. And that's enough. Danny nodded slowly. Yeah, I can live with that. That night, Jack tried to call Ryan but got no answer. He left a message. Hey son, I know you're busy. Just wanted to hear your voice. Things are getting complicated over here. The kind of complicated that makes an old man think about the choices he's made. He paused. I love you, and I'm sorry I wasn't around more when you were growing up. The Corps got the best of me, and you got what was left over. That wasn't fair to you or your mother. Anyway, call me when you can. He ended the call and sat staring at his phone, wondering if that sounded too much like a goodbye, wondering if maybe it was. The next morning, Major Chen found Jack on the firebase range running through drills with the advanced optics that he had finally committed to using. The laser rangefinder, the ballistic computer, the wind sensors, All the technology he had resisted for so long. Sergeant Hawkins, how's the training going? Learning, slowly. Chen watched him make a series of shots at varying distances, the computer calculating solutions faster than thought. You're adapting well for someone who spent his career arguing against all this. Necessity is a hell of a teacher. So is humility, Chen paused. I heard about your plan, using yourself as bait to draw out Ahmadi. News travels fast. It's a small fire base, and it's a terrible plan. Jack smiled despite himself. Probably, but it's the best option we've got. Chen was quiet for a moment, watching the mountains. You know what's going to happen if you succeed, right? If you kill Rashid Ahmadi, the ghost dies, the province gets safer, coalition casualties drop. That's the tactical outcome. I'm talking about the personal one. Chen turned to look at Jack directly. You'll have killed a man you once called friend, a man whose family died because of intelligence you provided. That's the kind of weight that doesn't go away just because the shooting stops. Jack had already thought about this, had already played out the scenario in his head. Rashid dead on some distant ridge, white feathers scattering in the wind. The knowledge that Jack had taken yet another life, this one bound up with guilt and shared history and the tangled morality of war. I know, Jack said quietly. And you're still going through with it? I don't have a choice. Rashid made his choice when he started killing Americans. Now I have to make mine. Chen nodded, accepting if not agreeing. Then I hope you're ready for what comes after. What came after? The question Jack had been avoiding since this whole nightmare began. Assuming he survived, assuming the plan worked, assuming Rashid died and the mission was complete. What then? Retirement to an empty house and a life defined by absence? Years of looking over his shoulder, wondering if there were other ghosts waiting for payment on other debts? Or maybe, just maybe, some kind of peace. The kind that came from doing the hard thing instead of the easy thing. From facing old sins instead of running from them. Jack didn't know. Couldn't know. All he could do was move forward, one shot at a time, and trust that the path would reveal itself. He spent the rest of the day preparing. Checking gear, running scenarios, trying to think like Rashid so he could anticipate how the ghost would respond to their trap. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting everything in shades of orange and purple, Jack climbed back to the observation post. He sat there as darkness fell, watching the stars emerge one by one, bright and cold and indifferent to the small dramas of men below. Somewhere in those mountains, Rashid Ahmadi was watching the same stars, thinking the same thoughts, preparing for the same confrontation. And when morning came, they would finally settle accounts for sins committed 15 years ago in a place neither of them could forget, no matter how hard they tried. The game had entered its final phase, and Jack Hawkins was betting everything on one last shot. The helicopter lifted off from Firebase Viper 3 hours before dawn, its rotors beating the darkness like the wings of some mechanical raptor. Jack Hawkins sat strapped into the canvas seat, his rifle between his knees, watching the Firebase lights recede into pinpricks and then nothing. Around him, the assault team sat in silence. Alicia Reeves across the bay, her face illuminated by the soft glow of her tablet as she reviewed final mission parameters. Marcus came beside her, eyes closed but clearly not sleeping. Danny Vega next to Jack, young and tense, and trying not to show either. They were flying to what might be a killing ground, their own or Rashid's. The next 12 hours would determine which. The plan was elegant in its simplicity, which meant it had approximately 1,000 ways to go catastrophically wrong. Jack would position himself on a prominent ridge 5 kilometers northeast of their last contact, exposed and alone, an irresistible target for a sniper who had spent 15 years waiting for exactly this opportunity. Alicia and Kane would establish overwatch positions on flanking ridges, 2,000 yards out, with clear fields of fire to the area where they expected Rashid to set up his killing shot. When the ghost revealed himself, when he focused all his attention on Jack, the flanking snipers would end him. Simple, elegant, probably suicidal. The helicopter descended into a valley that existed only as coordinates on a map, touching down long enough for the team to offload before screaming back into the sky. Silence rushed in to fill the void left by the departing aircraft, broken only by wind and the distant bark of wild dogs. Jack checked his watch. 0342 hours. 3 hours until sunrise, when light and shadow would paint the mountains in the high contrast that snipers loved and infantrymen feared. 3 hours to reach his position, set up his hide, and prepare to become bait. The team moved in tactical file through darkness, using night vision to navigate terrain that looked like the surface of an alien moon. Boulders the size of houses, gullies that could swallow a man whole, slopes so steep that climbing required hands and feet and prayers to gods who seemed to have abandoned these mountains centuries ago. Jack felt every step in his knees and back, the accumulation of 54 years and too many hard miles. But he kept pace, driven by something more fundamental than physical conditioning. This was personal now. Had always been personal, though Jack had spent 15 years pretending otherwise. 47 civilians dead because he had trusted bad intelligence. Rashid's wife and daughters turned to ash in memory because Jack Hawkins had looked through a scope and said, yes, that's the target, clear to engage. The mathematics of that equation had haunted him through sleepless nights and bitter mornings, through deployments and rotations home, and the slow dissolution of everything he had once believed about duty and honor. Now there would be an accounting. They reached the rally point as the sky began to lighten from black to deep purple. Alicia gathered the team, her voice low and professional. Final check. Comms, weapons, medical. Once we split up, we're on our own until extraction. Questions? Rules of engagement? Kane asked. Anyone who takes a shot at Sergeant Hawkins dies. Anyone who moves toward his position with hostile intent dies. We're not here to make arrests or take prisoners. We're here to eliminate a threat. Alicia looked at each of them in turn. Clear? Nods all around. Good. Kane, you've got the eastern approach. I'll take west. We give Sergeant Hawkins 90 minutes to get into position and set up. Then we wait. She turned to Jack. And you, Sergeant, don't do anything stupid. Jack managed a thin smile. Define stupid. Dying before we can kill the bastard who's trying to kill you. I'll do my best. The team split up, each element moving toward their assigned positions. Jack and Danny climbed alone, scrambling up goat paths that probably hadn't seen human traffic in decades. The work was hard and silent, broken only by labored breathing and the occasional rattle of displaced stone. By the time they reached the ridge crest, the sky had shifted to the deep blue that preceded dawn. Jack could see for miles in every direction. Valleys spreading like wounds across the landscape, mountains marching to distant horizons. And somewhere in all that vast emptiness, a man who had once called him teacher was watching and waiting. Jack selected his position with care. A cluster of rocks that provided cover from most angles but left him visible from the northeast, the direction he expected Rashid to approach from. Good fields of fire in multiple directions, escape routes if things went sideways. The kind of spot that screamed professional sniper to anyone who knew what to look for, which meant Rashid would know it was a trap. The question was whether pride and rage would override caution, whether 15 years of hate had built up enough pressure that Rashid would take the shot even knowing it might be his last. Jack was betting his life that the answer was yes. He spent 30 minutes improving his position, moving rocks, building a hide that looked natural from distance, but provided excellent firing angles up close. Danny worked beside him, silent and efficient, learning by doing the way young soldiers had learned for generations. When the work was done, Jack set up his rifle. The M24 he had carried for 8 years, now equipped with the advanced optics that represented everything he had once opposed. Laser rangefinder, ballistic computer, wind sensors feeding real-time data into algorithms that could calculate solutions faster than any human brain. The scope's display glowed softly in the pre-dawn darkness. Range to probable enemy positions, 2,100 to 2,400 yards. Wind variable, 8 to 14 miles per hour from the southwest. Temperature, 52 degrees Fahrenheit and rising. Humidity, 34%. Numbers, data, information that his failing eyes could no longer gather reliably on their own. Jack activated his radio, keying into the team frequency. Overwatch 1 in position. Alicia's voice came back immediately. Overwatch 2 in position. I have visual on your location. Overwatch 3 set. Kane's voice was tight, focused. No movement detected on approaches. Copy all. We wait for sunrise. Stay alert. The waiting was always the worst part. Jack had learned that truth over 30 years in 6 deployments. The moment before contact, when every sound might be an enemy and every shadow might hide a threat. Your mind played tricks. Your eyes saw movement where there was none. Time stretched and compressed in ways that defied physics. Danny lay beside him in the hide, his own rifle covering a different sector, his breathing controlled and steady. The kid had come a long way from the nervous corporal who had climbed into Jack's observation post back at Fort Benning. Combat had a way of aging people, teaching lessons in compressed time that civilian life might take decades to impart. Sarge? Danny's voice was barely a whisper. You really think he'll show? He'll show. How can you be sure? Jack thought about Rashid as he had been 15 years ago. Young, eager, full of life and hope, despite being born into a country that had known nothing but war for generations. A man who had believed in the promises of coalition forces, who had risked his life helping Americans because he thought it would lead to a better future for his family. And then Jack had taken that future away with a single radio call. Because I would, Jack said quietly. If someone had killed my family, I'd wait 15 years if that's what it took to make them pay. Danny absorbed this, perhaps understanding, for the first time, that the enemy they were hunting wasn't some faceless terrorist, but a man with motives as comprehensible as they were unforgivable. The sun broke over the eastern ridges like a promise or a threat, flooding the valleys with golden light that turned everything sharp and clear. Jack felt his heart rate accelerate, felt the familiar pre-combat rush of adrenaline, sharpening his senses and clearing his mind. Somewhere out there, Rashid was seeing the same sunrise, making the same preparations, loading the same kind of rifle with the same kind of ammunition. The only difference was which of them would die when the shooting started. An hour passed, then two. The sun climbed higher, burning away the morning chill and replacing it with the dry heat that would build all day until the mountains shimmered like mirages. Jack's eyes began to strain from constant observation, forcing him to blink and refocus every few minutes. Each time his vision blurred, panic spiked through him. What if this was the moment? What if Rashid was lining up his shot right now, and Jack couldn't see well enough to respond? But the moments passed, and no shots came. Just wind and heat, and the patient mountains keeping their secrets. Movement! Kane's voice cut through the radio silence like a blade. Grid reference Sierra 4908. Single individual, moving slow, approximately 1,800 yards from Hawkins' position. Jack swung his rifle to the indicated grid, scanning through his optics. There. A figure moving between boulders, using terrain for concealment, advancing with the patient care of someone who knew they were being watched. Through his scope, at maximum magnification, Jack could just make out details. Male, athletic build, carrying a rifle that even at this distance looked like American military issue. The man moved like a professional, economical, and deliberate, wasting no motion. I've got him, Jack reported, confirming single individual, appears to be armed with long rifle, cannot confirm identity from this range. He's moving toward a position that would give him clear shot on your location, Alicia said. Range approximately 2,000 yards once he's set up, well within his demonstrated capability. Jack watched the figure continue its approach. Every instinct screamed at him to take the shot now, to eliminate the threat before it became imminent. But that wasn't the plan. The plan required letting Rashid get into position, letting him believe he had the advantage, before springing the trap. The plan required Jack to sit exposed and vulnerable, while an expert marksman lined up a killing shot. Steady, Jack murmured, though whether he was talking to Danny or himself wasn't clear. Let him come. The figure reached a cluster of rocks about 2,100 yards from Jack's position. Through his scope, Jack watched the man set up a hide with practiced efficiency, rifle positioned for optimal stability, body aligned for long-duration shooting, minimal exposure, maximum concealment. Professional work, the kind of work that Jack himself had taught countless students over the years. He's setting up, Jack reported. Overwatch positions. Do you have firing solutions? Affirmative, Kane replied. Range 2,040 meters. Wind 7 knots southwest. I can take him anytime. Overwatch 2 confirms, Alicia added. Clear shot, minimal obstructions. On your call, Sergeant Hawkins. On your call. The weight of those 3 words settled over Jack like a physical burden. He was giving the order that would end a human life. Not in the heat of combat, not in immediate defense, but in calculated execution of a trap they had laid together. Was this justice or murder dressed up in tactical necessity? Stand by, Jack said. I need to confirm identity first. He studied the distant figure through his scope, searching for some detail that would prove beyond doubt that this was Rashid Ahmadi and not some unlucky Taliban fighter who happened to be in the wrong place. But at 2,000 yards, even with high magnification optics, individuals became collections of shapes and shadows. Then the figure did something that removed all doubt. He pulled out a white feather, held it up so it caught the sunlight, and placed it carefully on the rock beside his rifle. A calling card, a signature, a message intended for one man only. "Hello, teacher." Jack's finger moved to his transmit button. "Positive identification confirmed. Target is Rashid Ahmadi. Josh Dean. Overwatch positions, you are cleared to engage on my mark." "Copy. Standing by." Jack took a breath, preparing to give the order that would end 15 years of running from a mistake that could never be undone. But before he could speak, his radio crackled with a new voice, a voice he had not heard in person for a decade and a half, but recognized instantly. "Hello, old friend. Did you really think I wouldn't see your trap?" Jack felt ice water dump through his veins. If Rashid was on their frequency, if he had been listening to their communications this whole time, then he knew about the Overwatch positions, knew about Kane and Alicia waiting to take their shots, which meant the figure in the hide 2,000 yards away wasn't Rashid at all. "All positions, abort, abort, abort!" Jack shouted into the radio. "Target is not Ahmadi. Repeat, not Ahmadi. Do not engage." "Then who the hell is it?" Kane demanded. Before Jack could answer, the figure in the distant hide stood up, raising his hands above his head. Through the scope, Jack could see he was young, maybe 20, terrified and confused. Not a threat, not Rashid, just some local shepherd or farmer who had been paid or coerced into playing a role in a game he didn't understand. And somewhere else, somewhere Jack couldn't see, Rashid was watching and laughing. "You taught me well, teacher," Rashid's voice continued over the radio. "Always have a backup plan. Always think 3 moves ahead. Always make your enemy commit before revealing your true position." Jack scanned the surrounding ridges through his optics, searching desperately for any sign of where Rashid actually was. The mountains seemed to mock him, offering 1,000 hiding places and no answers. "I've been watching you for 3 days now," Rashid said. "Watching you set up your trap, watching you move your pieces into position. You have become predictable in your old age, and slow, and blind." There, a glint of reflected sunlight from a ridge that shouldn't have anyone on it. A ridge that was 3,200 yards from Jack's position, well beyond what anyone would consider practical engagement range. "I see you," Jack said quietly into the radio. "Do you? Then you see that I have clear shot on all 3 of your positions. Your Captain Reeves on the western ridge, Sergeant Kane on the eastern approach, and you, my old teacher, sitting exposed on the high ground like a sacrifice, waiting for the knife." It was true. From that position, elevated and distant, Rashid would have commanding views of the entire operational area. He could engage any of them at will, and by the time they oriented their return fire, he would be gone. Jack had been outmaneuvered by his own student. "What do you want, Rashid?" "I want you to understand, to really understand what you took from me." A pause. "Tell me, do you remember their names? My wife, my daughters." Jack closed his eyes. He had memorized the casualty reports from that airstrike, had tortured himself with the details for years. "Layla, your wife was named Layla. Your daughters were Zara and Amina." Silence on the radio. When Rashid spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. "You remember. Good. I was afraid you had forgotten them like you forgot all the others you killed." "I never forgot, not for a single day. And yet you kept killing, kept calling in strikes, kept trusting your government and your intelligence and your righteousness." Rashid's voice hardened. "Tell me, teacher, how many families have you destroyed? How many children turned to ash because Jack Hawkins said yes, engage, cleared hot?" The question landed like a physical blow, because Jack had asked himself the same thing through countless sleepless nights. He had 89 confirmed kills over 6 deployments. But how many of those kills had been righteous? How many had been mistakes like Helmand? How many ghost children did he carry on his soul? "Too many," Jack said quietly. "More than I can count, more than I can ever atone for." "Then you understand. Finally, you understand what it means to carry that weight." "I do." "Good." A pause. "Now you will carry one more." Before Jack could respond, before he could warn them or coordinate a response, Rashid fired. The shot came from impossible distance. A bullet that traveled for nearly 6 seconds across 3,000 yards of mountain air. Jack watched through his optics, helpless as the round impacted the rocks near Alicia's position. A warning shot, a demonstration of capability, a promise of what was coming. "Captain Reeves, are you hit?" Jack's voice was urgent. "Negative, negative. Close miss, maybe 3 feet from my position." Alicia's professional calm was cracking. Jesus Christ, that came from way out there. I can barely see the ridge he's shooting from. Kane, you got a firing solution? Working on it. Distance is extreme. Computer is having trouble with the atmospheric conditions at this range. Give me 30 seconds. 30 seconds. An eternity in a sniper duel. Rashid fired again, this time toward Kane's position. Another near miss, close enough that Jack heard Kane's startled curse over the radio. He's playing with us, Danny whispered beside Jack. He could have killed them both by now. The kid was right. Rashid wasn't shooting to kill. He was shooting to terrorize, to demonstrate absolute control over the situation, just like he had done during the ambush 3 days ago. But why? What was the endgame? Then Jack understood. He wants me to run, Jack said aloud. Wants me to break cover and try to help, expose myself in the open. That's when he'll take the killing shot. So what do we do? Good question. They were pinned down by a sniper operating at extreme range, with demonstrated ability to hit targets that most marksmen would consider beyond engagement distance. Moving meant dying. Staying put meant waiting for Rashid to get bored with psychological warfare and start finishing what he started. Unless Jack could make a shot that no reasonable person would attempt. He looked through his advanced optics at the distant ridge where Rashid had positioned himself. 3,200 yards, nearly 2 miles. At that distance, his bullet would drop over 80 feet, would be affected by wind at multiple altitudes as it arced through the air, would take more than 6 seconds to reach target, during which time Rashid could move, duck, disappear. It was impossible, but Jack had made impossible shots before. Overwatch positions, on my mark. I need you to put suppressive fire on Rashid's location, not trying to hit him, just make him keep his head down for 10 seconds. Can you do that? Affirmative, Alicia responded. What are you planning? Something stupid. Jack activated the advanced scope's full suite of sensors. Laser rangefinder painted the target. 3,194 yards, the display read. Ballistic computer began calculating, feeding in atmospheric data, wind speed at various altitudes, even the Coriolis effect from Earth's rotation at this latitude. The reticle adjusted automatically, rising higher and higher above the target to account for bullet drop. The aim point ended up nearly 20 feet above where Rashid was positioned, a shot into empty sky that defied all logic. But the math didn't lie. Danny, I need you to spot for me. Watch for impact. Give me corrections if I miss. Sarge, that's over 3,000 yards. That's beyond max effective range for this weapon system. I know, spot for me anyway. Jack settled into his shooting position, feeling his body align with practices so ingrained they had become instinctive. Breathing slowed, heart rate dropped. The world narrowed to the space between crosshairs and target. His vision blurred. Jack blinked hard, panic rising. Not now. Please, God, not now. The world swam back into focus, but his confidence was shattered. How could he make this shot when he couldn't even trust his eyes to show him reality? Then he remembered what Fareed had said in the chapel. You saved lives today by being brave enough to triumph. Brave or stupid, maybe there was no difference. Overwatch positions. Mark. Jack's voice was steady despite his racing heart. 3, 2, 1, execute. Alicia and Kane opened fire, their rounds cracking across the valley toward Rashid's position. Not aimed shots, just volume of fire to force him into cover. Jack stopped breathing, stopped thinking, let 30 years of training take over and guide his hands through movements too fast for conscious thought. He pressed the trigger. The rifle bucked. The bullet began its long journey across impossible distance. Through his scope, Jack watched Rashid pop up from cover, lining up his own shot, not seeing the danger coming. 6 seconds. 6 seconds during which Jack's bullet traced an arc through the thin mountain air. 6 seconds during which Rashid's rifle swung toward Alicia's position. 6 seconds that would determine whether Jack Hawkins was a hero or a fool. The bullet struck. Not a kill shot, not even a solid hit, but enough. Through his optics, Jack saw Rashid jerk backward, saw the rifle tumble from his hands, saw him disappear into the rocks clutching his shoulder. Hit! Danny screamed. Holy shit, Sarge, you hit him! But Rashid wasn't finished. Even wounded, even bleeding, he grabbed his rifle with his good hand and returned fire. The shot was rushed, angry, and it missed Alicia's position by a wider margin than before. He was hurt, off balance, vulnerable. All positions, engage at will, Jack ordered. Put him down. The ridge where Rashid had positioned himself erupted in impacts as 3 rifles poured fire into his location. Rock fragments and dust filled the air. Rashid tried to return fire again, but the volume of incoming rounds forced him back into cover. "He's moving," Kane reported, displacing east toward the Pakistan border. Jack tracked movement through his scope, catching glimpses of Rashid as he scrambled away from his position. The man was fast despite his wound, using terrain expertly, making himself a difficult target. Jack fired again. Miss! The bullet impacted 5 feet behind Rashid's running form. Alicia fired. Closer, but still a miss. Kane fired. The bullet kicked up dust at Rashid's feet, close enough that the man stumbled and nearly fell. But he kept moving, kept running, disappearing into the maze of boulders and ravines that would lead him across the border and into sanctuary. "Do we pursue?" Alicia asked. Jack wanted to say yes, wanted to chase Rashid down and finish what they had started, but the tactical situation was wrong. They were undermanned in hostile territory with an injured enemy who knew the terrain better than they did. Pursuit would likely mean walking into another ambush. "Negative," Jack said, the word tasting like defeat. "Let him go. We've accomplished the mission objective." "Have we? He's still alive. But he's wounded, bleeding, running. He won't be operating in this province anymore." Jack paused. Sometimes driving the enemy away is victory enough. The team held position for another hour, watching for any sign that Rashid might circle back or that other enemy forces might be moving in. But the mountains were silent except for wind and the distant cry of hummingbirds. Finally, Alicia gave the order to extract. They moved down from their positions as the sun climbed toward noon, the heat building to levels that made Jack's head swim and his vision blur. He forced himself to keep moving, to maintain tactical awareness, to be the professional soldier his team needed him to be. But inside, he felt hollow. 15 years of guilt, 15 years of carrying the weight of Helmand Province, and the closest he had come to resolution was a wounded enemy escaping across a border he couldn't cross. The helicopter extraction went smoothly, the pilots threading through the valleys with practiced skill. Jack sat in the vibrating cargo bay, staring at nothing, feeling the mission settle into his bones like old injuries on a rainy day. Danny sat beside him, still buzzing with adrenaline. "Sarge, that shot, over 3,000 yards and you hit him. I've never seen anything like it." Jack didn't respond. Couldn't find words to explain that the shot felt less like victory than confirmation of everything he had been trying to avoid. He had needed technology to make it, had needed the ballistic computer and laser rangefinder and wind sensors because his own eyes and judgment could no longer be trusted. He had become exactly what he had spent his career arguing against. Back at Firebase Viper, Colonel Garrett was waiting with Major Chen and a field trauma team on standby in case anyone had been injured. The mission debrief was quick and professional. Enemy sniper engaged and wounded, no friendly casualties. Tactical objective achieved. But when the formal debrief ended and the other soldiers had filed out, Garrett pulled Jack aside. "Walk with me." They walked the perimeter of the firebase, 2 old soldiers who had shared too much history to need small talk. "You know he's not done," Garrett said finally. "Rashid, he'll heal up and come back. Maybe not this month or this year, but someday." "I know, and you'll be waiting." Jack stopped walking, looking out at the mountains that had taken so much from so many. "No, I won't. My tour ends in 6 weeks. I'll hit 30 years, take my retirement, and go home. And let someone else deal with Rashid? Let someone younger deal with him. Someone whose eyes still work. Someone who doesn't carry the same guilt." Jack turned to face Garrett. "I drove him away, Jim. That's all I can do. The rest belongs to the next generation." Garrett studied him for a long moment. "That might be the wisest thing I've ever heard you say." "Don't get used to it." They stood together in silence, watching the sun paint the mountains in shades of amber and gold. Somewhere beyond those peaks, in a country that had never quite been enemy or ally, Rashid Ahmadi was binding his wounds and planning his next move. But that was a problem for tomorrow. Today, Jack Hawkins had done what he came to do. He had faced his ghosts, made his accounting, and accepted the limitations that age and injury had imposed. It wasn't the dramatic finale that stories were made of. Wasn't the clean resolution that would satisfy audiences looking for neat endings. But it was real, and sometimes real was better than perfect. That night, Jack finally got through to Ryan. His son's face appeared on the phone screen, lined with concern. "Dad, I heard there was contact. You okay?" "I'm fine, little beat up, but that's par for the course." "You look tired." Jack smiled. "I am tired, 54-year-old tired, the kind that sleep doesn't fix." Ryan was quiet for a moment. "You coming home soon?" "6 weeks. Then I'm done, 30 years and out." You mean that? Because you've said you were done before. I mean it. It's time, Ryan. Time to let the young bulls have the field. Jack paused. Your mother was right about knowing when to let go. I'm learning. She'd be proud of you. I'm proud of you. The words hit harder than Jack expected, bringing a tightness to his throat that he had to clear before he could respond. Thanks, son. That means more than you know. They talked for another 20 minutes about nothing important and everything that mattered. Ryan's life in Okinawa, plans for when Jack retired, whether he would consider moving closer to his son instead of staying in the emptiness of the house in Georgia. When they finally ended the call, Jack felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Not for glory or vindication or dramatic resolution of old sins. Just hope that the years ahead might be gentler than the years behind. He lay in his bunk that night, listening to the familiar sounds of the fire base, knowing he only had 6 more weeks of this life before it ended forever. The thought should have terrified him. Instead, it brought a strange peace. Jack Hawkins had been a soldier for 30 years, had been a sniper for most of that time, had made 89 confirmed kills and one terrible mistake that had defined the second half of his career. But he was more than the sum of his shots, more than his successes and failures. He was a father, a friend, a teacher who had passed his knowledge to a new generation. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. Outside, the mountains kept their secrets. And somewhere in the darkness, a wounded ghost named Rashid Ahmadi was making his own plans for the future. But that was his burden to carry now. Jack had carried it long enough. The calendar on Jack Hawkins' desk showed 42 days since the firefight on the ridge, 42 days of training Afghan snipers who would carry on the mission after he was gone, 42 days of teaching Danny Vega and watching the kid transform from enthusiastic amateur to competent professional. 42 days of accepting that his war was ending, not with a bang, but with the quiet dignity of a job completed and a torch passed. He had 4 days left in country. The firebase had settled into the peculiar rhythm that marked the end of a deployment. Soldiers became short timers, their minds already halfway home, even while their bodies went through the motions of patrol and guard duty and endless maintenance on equipment that would be left behind for the next rotation. Jack understood the feeling, had lived it on 5 previous deployments. But this time was different. This time there would be no next deployment, no return to these mountains and the ghosts that haunted them. This time, Jack Hawkins was going home for good. The morning briefing was routine. Enemy activity in the province had dropped significantly since the engagement 6 weeks ago. The ghost, as intelligence still referred to Rashid Ahmadi despite knowing his true identity, had vanished. No kills, no white feathers, no radio transmissions taunting American forces. Either he was dead from his wounds, or he had withdrawn across the border to heal and plan. Jack suspected the latter. Men like Rashid didn't die quietly. After the briefing, Jack walked to the firebase range where Zamarai and his Afghan snipers were running through drills. The old warrior had proven to be an excellent student and an even better teacher, taking the principles Jack had taught and adapting them for soldiers who would fight in these mountains long after the Americans went home. Zamarai looked up as Jack approached, his weathered face creasing into a smile. Sergeant Hawkins, you come to check my work? Just wanted to see how the new generation is doing. They watched together as young Bashir, the nervous recruit who had frozen during the ambush, methodically engaged targets at 600 yards. The kid's form was textbook now, his breathing controlled, his trigger press smooth. Fear had been replaced by competence, and competence had bred confidence. You have taught him well, Jack said. I taught him what you taught me. The circle continues, yes? Zamarai paused. I hear you leave in 4 days. That's right, 30 years and done. And what will you do? In your America when the fighting stops? It was a question Jack had been asking himself for weeks. The house in Georgia waited, empty and full of memories. Ryan had invited him to Okinawa, suggested he could find work teaching at one of the bases there. Colonel Garrett had mentioned civilian contractor positions, good pay for experienced snipers willing to train foreign militaries. But none of it felt right. Jack was tired, bone-deep tired, the kind of exhaustion that came from carrying too much weight for too long. I don't know, Jack admitted. Rest, maybe. Figure out who I am when I'm not Sergeant Hawkins. Zamarai nodded slowly. This is good. A warrior must know when the war is finished, even if the fighting continues. He looked out at the mountains. I envy you. I have been fighting since I was 15 years old. Soviets, then warlords, then Taliban, now Taliban again with different flags. I do not remember peace. Perhaps I would not recognize it if it came. Maybe that's what we're fighting for, so the next generation doesn't have to say the same thing. Perhaps we fight because that is what we know. And stopping means admitting we have wasted our lives on something that cannot be won. It was the kind of brutal honesty that Jack had come to expect from Zmarai. The old warrior had no illusions about the war he was fighting or the likelihood of victory. He fought because his country needed him to fight, and because stopping meant acknowledging that everything he had sacrificed might have been for nothing. Jack understood that more than he cared to admit. They stood together in comfortable silence, two old soldiers watching young ones learn the craft that had defined their lives. Then Zemarai spoke again, his voice quiet. The ghost, Rashid. You think he is finished? No, but I think he's someone else's problem now. You believe this? Or you hope this? Jack thought about the question, about Rashid wounded and bleeding, escaping into mountains that had sheltered fighters for thousands of years, about the hate in his voice when he spoke of his dead family, about the patience required to wait 15 years for revenge. I hope it, Jack said honestly, but I don't believe it. Zmarai nodded, accepting the truth they both understood. Some debts could never be fully paid. Some ghosts never stopped haunting. The best you could do was drive them away and hope they didn't come back. The afternoon brought a surprise visitor. Captain Alicia Reeves found Jack in his quarters, packing the accumulated gear of 3 decades into duffel bags that somehow never seemed large enough. Sergeant Hawkins, got a minute? For you, Captain, always. Alicia sat on the edge of Jack's bunk, looking around at the sparse room that had been his home for the past 4 months. Hard to believe it's almost over. Time has a way of passing, whether you're ready or not. I wanted to thank you for everything you've taught me about sniping, about leadership, about knowing when to trust technology and when to trust instinct. She paused. I know we didn't always see eye to eye. Jack smiled. Best students are the ones who challenge their teachers. You made me better, Alicia. Made me question assumptions I'd carried for too long. The shot you made, on the ridge, 3,000 yards with failing eyesight. Alicia shook her head. That's going to be legend. They'll be teaching it at sniper school for years. They'll be teaching that technology extends capability beyond natural limitation. That's the real lesson. Is it? Because I think the lesson is that great shooters adapt. They use every advantage available, but at the end of the day, it's still the person behind the rifle that matters. Alicia met his eyes. You could have retired years ago, could have stepped aside when your eyes started failing, but you stayed and you found a way to still be effective. That's not weakness, Sergeant, that's strength. Jack felt something loosen in his chest. For weeks, he had been wrestling with the shame of needing help, of relying on machines to do what his body could no longer manage. But maybe Alicia was right. Maybe adaptation wasn't surrender. Maybe accepting help was its own kind of courage. Thank you, Jack said quietly. I needed to hear that. I know. Alicia stood, straightening her uniform. I'm putting you in for the Bronze Star, for the engagement on the ridge, and for everything you have contributed to this mission. Colonel Garrett is endorsing it. That's not necessary. It absolutely is. You earned it. She moved toward the door, then stopped. One more thing. I'm recommending Corporal Vega for promotion to sergeant in assignment to sniper school when he rotates home. Kid's got natural talent, and you've polished him into something special. Jack felt pride swell in his chest. Danny had come so far in such a short time. He'll make a fine instructor someday, following in your footsteps. After Alicia left, Jack continued packing. Each item that went into the duffel bags carried memories. The scope he had resisted using until necessity demanded it. The range cards from a dozen different fire bases across 2 decades. Photographs of soldiers he had trained, some of whom were still serving, others who had given the last full measure. And at the bottom of his footlocker, wrapped in oilcloth, the white feather that had been found near his position after the engagement with Rashid. Jack had kept it, though he couldn't quite explain why. A reminder, perhaps, or a talisman, or just the irrational superstition that came from spending too long in a profession where luck and skill danced together in ways that defied explanation. That evening, Jack walked the firebase perimeter one last time. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting everything in shades of gold and purple that made even this hard place beautiful. Soldiers nodded as he passed, showing the respect due to a senior NCO who had earned his stripes the hard way. He found Marcus Kane at the Eastern Observation Post, sitting watch, his rifle across his lap. Kane, Hawkins, heard you're leaving in a few days. That's right. Kane was quiet for a moment, watching the valleys below. I owe you an apology. Back at Benning, I said things. About you being past your prime, about how age was catching up. I was wrong. You were right, I was past my prime. Am past it. Maybe, but you still made the shots that mattered. Still taught us that technology is a tool, not a replacement for skill. Kane turned to look at Jack directly. You proved that experience counts for something, that the old ways still have value even in a world that's constantly changing. It was generous, coming from a man who had every reason to see Jack as competition. Thank you, that means a lot. I'm going to be honest with you. When I first heard you were on this deployment, I thought you were making a mistake. Thought you should have retired years ago and let guys like me take over. Kane paused. But watching you work, seeing how you adapted when your eyes started failing, how you swallowed your pride and learned to use the tech you'd always dismissed, that taught me more than any training course ever could. What did it teach you? That being a professional means doing whatever it takes to complete the mission, even if it means admitting weakness, even if it means changing everything you thought you knew. Kane smiled slightly. You're going to be a tough act to follow, old man. You'll do fine, better than fine. Just remember to pass it on when your time comes. They sat together as darkness fell, two generations of snipers finding common ground in the eternal truths of their profession. Patience, precision, the willingness to wait hours or days or years for a single perfect shot. The radio on Kane's vest crackled to life. All stations, this is TOC. Be advised, we have unconfirmed reports of a single individual moving through Sector 7 Alpha. Unknown intent. All observation posts maintain vigilance. Sector 7 Alpha was northeast of the firebase, the same general direction from which previous attacks had originated. Jack felt his senses sharpen, old instincts kicking in despite his short-timer status. You think it's him? Kane asked. Could be nothing. Could be a farmer heading home late. Could be Taliban recon. Or it could be a ghost settling accounts. They watched the darkening mountains through night vision, searching for movement that might indicate hostile intent. But the valleys remained quiet, giving up no secrets. An hour passed, then two. The radio stayed silent except for routine check-ins from other observation posts. Whatever had triggered the initial report had either moved on or been a false alarm. I'm going to do a sweep, Jack said, standing. Check the perimeter. Make sure everyone's alert. Want company? No, you stay here. Keep eyes on the approaches. Jack walked the fire base perimeter, stopping at each fighting position to check in with the soldiers manning them. Young men and women, most of them on their first deployment, all of them counting down the days until they could go home. They showed him the casual respect due to senior NCOs, but Jack could see the distance in their eyes. To them, he was already part of history, a relic from an earlier era of the war. Maybe they were right. He was approaching the Western observation post when his phone buzzed, a message from Ryan. Dad, just heard from Colonel Garrett's office. Your retirement ceremony is scheduled for next week at Fort Benning. I'm flying in from Okinawa. Can't wait to see you. Jack smiled, typing back a response. Looking forward to it. Love you, son. Then a second message appeared, this one from an unknown number. Hello, teacher. Did you think I had forgotten you? Jack's blood went cold. He immediately keyed his radio. TOC, this is Hawkins. I just received a text message from a potential hostile. Source unknown, but content suggests Rashid Ahmadi. Recommend immediate heightened alert status. The Tactical Operations Center responded instantly. Copy, Hawkins. Going to alert posture now. Can you forward that message to our intel section? Sending now. Jack forwarded the message, then stared at his phone, waiting for another text. None came, just that single message. Delivered from somewhere into the darkness, proving that Rashid was alive and watching. The firebase went into full alert. Guard posts doubled. Quick reaction force staged. Every weapon system manned and ready. But the night passed without incident, and as dawn broke over the mountains, the tension began to ease. Colonel Garrett arrived by helicopter at 900, his expression grave. He found Jack in the operations center, studying maps and drone footage. Talk to me, Jack. What are we looking at? Rashid's alive, healed up enough to be mobile, and he's close enough to have cellular service, which means he's either right on the border or our side of it. You think he's coming after you specifically? I know he is. This has always been personal. Garrett studied the maps, his tactical mind working through scenarios. We could keep you here, Extend your deployment until we neutralize the threat. No, Jack's voice was firm. I've got 3 days left. I'm not letting Rashid dictate my schedule or my life. If he wants to take a shot at me, he'll have to do it before I get on that helicopter. That's what concerns me. You're giving him a deadline, a specific window of opportunity. That's exactly what he wants. Then let's give him what he wants, on our terms. They spent the next hour planning. Jack would continue his normal routine, training Afghan snipers, conducting final inspections, preparing for departure. But shadow teams would follow his movements, overwatch positions would be manned at all times, and quick reaction forces would be staged to respond to any threat. It was as much security as could be provided without turning Jack into a prisoner. And if Rashid was going to make his move, they would be ready. The next 2 days passed in tense anticipation. Every moment felt weighted with possibility. Every shadow might hide a threat. Every distant sound might be the crack of a rifle shot. But nothing happened. No attacks, no messages, no sign of Rashid beyond that single text message. Jack continued teaching, knowing these were his last classes. He passed on everything he had learned over 30 years. The technical aspects of long-range shooting, the mental discipline required to wait for perfect shots, the moral weight of taking human lives, and the importance of never becoming casual about it. On his final afternoon, Jack gathered Danny Vega and the Afghan snipers for one last session. They sat in the shade of a concrete blast wall, rifles stacked nearby, and Jack spoke to them not as soldiers, but as inheritors of a tradition that stretched back through generations of warriors. You've learned the mechanics, how to read wind, how to calculate drop, how to use technology to extend your capabilities. Those are important skills, but they're not what makes a sniper. The students leaned forward, attentive. What makes a sniper is understanding the weight of the trigger, knowing that every time you fire, you're making a decision that can't be unmade. You're taking responsibility for a death, and that responsibility stays with you forever. Jack paused, remembering faces from 30 years, targets that had been people with families and futures before his bullet found them. Some of those deaths will be righteous, clean kills against enemies who needed killing. But some will haunt you. Mistakes. Innocent people caught in the machinery of war, children. He saw understanding in their eyes. They had all felt that weight, even the youngest among them. The technology keeps getting better. The rifles more accurate, the scopes more powerful, the computers faster. But none of that changes the fundamental truth. You are the one pulling the trigger. You are the one who has to live with the consequences. Jack looked at each of them in turn. So I'm asking you to promise me something. Promise that you'll always remember that your targets are human beings, that you'll never become casual about taking life, and that when your time comes, when your eyes start to fail, or your hands start to shake, or your soul gets too tired to carry the weight anymore, you'll have the wisdom to step aside and let someone younger take your place. Danny Vega spoke up, his voice thick with emotion. Is that what you're doing, Sarge? Stepping aside? That's exactly what I'm doing. Because I'm not the shooter I used to be, and pretending otherwise would be dishonest to you and dangerous to the mission. Jack smiled. But that's okay, because I've trained good people to take over. People like you, Danny, like all of you. The mission continues even when individual soldiers move on. That evening, Jack packed the last of his gear. Tomorrow morning, a helicopter would take him to Bagram, then a C-17 to Germany, then finally home to Georgia, and whatever life waited for him there. 30 years compressed into duffel bags and memories. He was sitting on his bunk, lost in thought, when Zamarai appeared in the doorway. Sergeant Hawkins, may I speak with you? Of course. Zamarai entered, holding something wrapped in cloth. He sat beside Jack and carefully unfolded the fabric, revealing an old rifle. Not an American weapon, but a British Lee Enfield, probably 70 years old, the wood worn smooth by generations of hands. This belonged to my grandfather. He fought the British with it in the 1920s. My father carried it against the Soviets. I have used it for 30 years. Zamarai held the rifle out to Jack. I want you to have it. Jack was stunned. Zamarai, I can't accept this. It's a family heirloom. Exactly, and you are family. You have taught me, trusted me, treated me as equal when others treated me as servant. This rifle has served 3 generations of warriors. Now it should go to a warrior I respect. Zamarai's eyes were bright. Please, let it remind you that what you taught matters, that the circle continues. Jack took the rifle, feeling the weight of history in his hands. How many lives had this weapon taken? How many battles had it witnessed? And now it was being entrusted to him, a symbol of respect that transcended nations and flags and the arbitrary divisions of modern warfare. Thank you, I'll treasure it. Good. Now go home, my friend. Go home and rest. You have earned it. They embraced, two old warriors saying goodbye, knowing they would probably never see each other again. The war would continue, but for Jack Hawkins, the fighting was done. That night, Jack slept fitfully, dreams mixing with memories in ways he couldn't untangle. He saw Sarah, young and laughing, saw Ryan as a child, playing with toy soldiers, saw Rashid before the airstrike, smiling and full of hope, saw all the faces of all the people he had killed, lined up like photographs in some cosmic gallery. He woke before dawn, as he had done every day for 30 years, put on his uniform for what would be the last time in combat, checked his rifle one final time, knowing he would never carry it in anger again. The helicopter was scheduled for 700. Jack walked to the landing zone just as the sky began to lighten, carrying his duffel bags and Zmarai's rifle. A small group had gathered to see him off. Alicia, Danny, Marcus Kane, a handful of Afghan soldiers. No ceremony, no speeches. Just quiet nods and handshakes and the shared understanding of people who had been to hard places together. The helicopter appeared on the horizon, its rotors beating the morning air. Jack felt something twist in his chest. This was it, the moment when his old life ended and the uncertain future began. Then his phone buzzed one final time. Another message from the unknown number. You taught me to wait for the perfect shot, to be patient, to let the target come to you. Today is my perfect shot, teacher, but I will not take it. Jack's hand went to his rifle, scanning the surrounding ridges for threats. But even as he searched, another message appeared. You are already dead, Jack Hawkins. Not by my hand, but by time and age and the weight you carry. I could kill you today, but in 6 months your eyes will be gone. In a year, perhaps your heart will fail. Why should I give you the clean death of a warrior when you can have the slow death you gave my family? Living with grief and guilt in the knowledge that you destroyed everything beautiful in the world. Jack stared at the message, understanding finally dawning. This was Rashid's real revenge. Not a bullet, but the burden of survival. The curse of living with what you had done. A third message came through. Goodbye, teacher. Live long. Remember everything. And know that every night when you close your eyes, I will be there. In your dreams, in your memories, in the darkness behind your eyelids. This is my gift to you. The messages stopped. Jack waited, but no more came. Just silence and the sound of the approaching helicopter. He understood now. Rashid had won. Not by killing Jack, but by choosing not to. By letting him live with his guilt and his failing body and his haunted conscience. It was a more subtle victory than a sniper's bullet, and infinitely crueler. But it was also a kind of freedom. Jack climbed aboard the helicopter, taking a seat near the open door. As the aircraft lifted off, he looked down at Firebase Viper, at the mountains that had taken so much from so many, at the land where he had fought his last war. Somewhere down there, Rashid Ahmadi was watching. Perhaps through a scope, perhaps with satisfaction at seeing his old teacher fly away, diminished and defeated. But Rashid didn't know everything, didn't know that Jack had already made peace with his mortality, had already accepted that some debts could never be repaid, had already chosen to live with his guilt rather than be destroyed by it. Yes, he would remember, would carry the weight of Helmand Province until the day he died, would see Layla and Zara and Amina in his dreams. But he would also remember the soldiers he had trained, the lives he had saved, the young men and women like Danny Vega who would carry forward the profession he loved. The helicopter climbed higher, carrying Jack away from Afghanistan for the final time. He looked out at the mountains receding below, and something occurred to him. A thought that brought the first real smile he had felt in weeks. Rashid thought he had won by letting Jack live. But in doing so, he had given Jack something more valuable than death. He had given him time. Time to watch his son grow. Time to perhaps find peace. Time to discover who Jack Hawkins was when he wasn't Sergeant Hawkins. Maybe that was Rashid's real gift. Not cruelty, but mercy dressed up as revenge. Or maybe Jack was just old enough to find wisdom in places where younger men saw only defeat. The helicopter banked west toward Bagram, toward home, toward whatever future waited beyond the mountains. Jack closed his eyes, feeling the sun warm on his face, and let himself imagine it. A house in Georgia, Ryan visiting with stories about his life in the Marines, maybe a teaching position at some small college, passing on knowledge to students who had never held a rifle. It wasn't the ending he had imagined when he first put on the uniform 30 years ago. Wasn't the blaze of glory that young soldiers dreamed about, but it was real and honest, and maybe, just maybe, it was enough. 6 months later, Jack Hawkins stood at a shooting range in Georgia, watching a class of civilian students struggle with the fundamentals of long-range marksmanship. They were hunters and competition shooters, people who did this for sport rather than survival. But the principles were the same: patience, precision, respect for the weapon and the target. His eyes had deteriorated as predicted. He wore thick glasses now, and even with them, his vision was limited. He could no longer shoot competitively, could barely see targets beyond 500 yards. But he could teach, could pass on 30 years of accumulated knowledge to people who would never know what it meant to shoot at targets that shot back. His phone rang during the lunch break. Ryan's name appeared on the screen. "Hey, son." "Dad, just wanted to check in. How's the teaching going?" "Good. These civilians are soft, but they're eager to learn." Ryan laughed. "Everything's soft compared to the military. You adjusting to retirement okay?" "Better than I expected. Turns out there's life after the uniform." "Glad to hear it. Hey, I've got some news. I'm getting married. Woman I met here in Okinawa. Sarah. Figured you'd appreciate the name." Jack felt his throat tighten. "That's wonderful, son. Your mother would be so happy." "Yeah, I think she would." A pause. "We're planning the wedding for next spring. Georgia, if that works. Figured you could walk Sarah's side since her dad passed away. It would be an honor." They talked for a few more minutes about wedding plans and life and all the small details that made up a world at peace. When they hung up, Jack sat in the afternoon sun, feeling something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Contentment. He had made his peace with the past, had accepted that some ghosts would never stop haunting, but that haunting was different from destroying. Had learned that strength sometimes meant accepting help, and that wisdom often looked like surrender to people who didn't understand. The students returned from lunch, ready for the afternoon session. Jack stood, his knees protesting the movement, and walked to the firing line. There was work to do, knowledge to pass on, a new generation to train. And somewhere in mountains halfway around the world, a ghost named Rashid Ahmadi was living with his own demons, perhaps finding his own peace, perhaps still planning revenge. Jack would never know, and that was okay. Because in the end, the last kill wasn't the one you made, it was the one you chose not to make. The moment when you decided that living well was better revenge than dying perfectly. Jack Hawkins had made that choice. And as he watched his students work through their drills, making mistakes and learning and slowly getting better, he knew he had made the right one. The mountains kept their secrets. The dead remained dead, and life, complicated and messy and beautiful, continued. It was enough. It would always be enough. Jack Hawkins' story reminds me why I started this channel. At 54, facing blindness, he could have walked away with honor. Instead, he made the hardest choice a warrior can make, admitting he needed help to complete one final mission. That 3,000-yard shot wasn't just about skill. It was about swallowing 30 years of pride and trusting the technology he'd always rejected. What would you have done in his position? Retired quietly or risked everything for one last stand? Drop your thoughts below. I read every comment, and if this story moved you, there's more coming. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one.